The air in the Whitmore estate dining room was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and old money. I sat at the long mahogany table, my tie too tight, my hands folded like a kid waiting for permission to speak. Clara was across from me, laughing at something her cousin said, her eyes bright in a way they hadn't been with me in months. Her family filled the room, uncles in tailored blazers, aunts with diamond earrings, all of them trading stories about vacations I'd never been invited to. I was Miles Harrington, the guy who married into this, the one they tolerated because Clara said I do 6 years ago. But I wasn't one of them. Never would be. I sipped my orange juice, trying to blend into the wallpaper, when Julian, Clara's older brother, leaned across the table. His cufflinks glinted under the chandelier. "Miles," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're awfully quiet. Don't they teach you how to talk at those community colleges?" A few chuckles rippled around the table. My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. I'd learned to let his jab slide. Clara said it was easier that way. "Keep the peace," she'd whisper after every family gathering, her hand on my arm like she was soothing a dog. I was about to change the subject, ask about the weather or some safe nonsense, when Julian picked up his coffee mug. It was steaming, fresh from the pot. He looked right at me, his smirk sharp as a blade, and then he tilted the mug. Hot coffee splashed across my face, burning my skin, soaking my shirt. The room went silent. My eyes stung, my cheeks throbbed, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Julian laughed, a short, cruel bark, and said, "Oops. Clumsy me. I don't remember standing. I don't remember balling my fist. But I remember the crack of my knuckles against his jaw, the way his head snapped back, the way his chair tipped as he hit the floor." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a fork. Clara's mother, Beatrix, clutched her pearls like I'd just set the table on fire. Julian scrambled to his feet, holding his face, his eyes wide with shock. I stood there, my hand throbbing, coffee dripping down my chin, waiting for someone to say something. Anything. Clara stared at me, her mouth a thin line, her eyes cold as the marble floor. No one asked if I was okay. No one called Julian out for what he'd done. Beatrix rushed to her son, cooing over him like he was a wounded child, not a 38-year-old man who just assaulted me. My father-in-law, Edward, cleared his throat and said, "Miles, perhaps you should step outside." Step outside. Like I was the problem. I looked at Clara again, waiting for her to stand up, to say, "Julian, what the hell?" But she didn't. She folded her napkin, set it neatly on the table, and looked away. My chest burned worse than my face. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer with its crystal chandelier and family portraits, and onto the front porch. The Connecticut air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel alive, but all I felt was small. I touched my cheek, red, tender, probably scarring. I'd spent years swallowing their insults, their sideways glances, their jokes about my job as a software engineer, my parents' small house, my life before Clara. I'd done it for her. For us. But standing there, with the echo of Julian's laugh in my head and Clara's silence louder than anything, I realized something. I wasn't just invisible to them. I was invisible to her too. The door behind me stayed shut. No one came after me, not Clara, not her cousins, not even the staff who'd seen the whole thing. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking, and opened a browser. I didn't know what I was looking for, not yet. But I knew I couldn't go back inside. Not to that table, not to that life. My thumb hovered over the screen, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd forgotten. Anger, yes, but also the faint pulse of my own worth. I wasn't going to apologize. Not this time. The balcony off the Whitmore estate's second floor was my refuge that night, a slab of stone overlooking a manicured lawn that stretched into the dark. I leaned against the railing, the cold metal biting into my palms, my face still raw from the coffee Julian had dumped on me hours ago. Inside, the family was gathered in the drawing room. Clara's laughter floated through the open window, sharp and carefree, mixing with the clink of wine glasses and the low hum of smug voices. They'd moved on like nothing happened, like I hadn't just punched her brother in front of them all, like he hadn't deserved it. My shirt was still damp, sticking to my chest, and every breath stung where the skin on my cheeks had turned pink and tight. I pressed my fingers to it, wincing, wondering if it'd leave a mark I'd have to explain to strangers. Downstairs, after I'd walked out of the dining room, Clara had followed me, not to check on me, but to scold me. She'd stood in the foyer, her arms crossed, her blonde hair perfect even in her anger, and said, "You should take every insult and apologize, Miles. That's how this works. How this works." Like I was a guest who'd broken some sacred rule, not her husband who'd just been humiliated. I'd stared at her, waiting for something sympathy, a flicker of loyalty, but her eyes were hard, her mouth set. He burnt me, Clara, I'd said, my voice low, shaky. He poured hot coffee on my face. She'd sighed, like I was being dramatic, and muttered, Julian's just like that. You know how he is. Then she'd turned and walked back to them, her heels clicking on the marble, leaving me standing there like a fool. Now, out here in the night air, I replayed it over and over, her words, her dismissal, the way no one had even offered me a towel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Clara, come back inside. You're making this worse. Worse for who? I didn't reply. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my chest heavier than it had been in years. I'd spent 6 years trying to fit into her world. 6 years of biting my tongue when Julian called me to help at Thanksgiving, of nodding along when Beatrix asked if my parents' house had indoor plumbing, of pretending I didn't notice Edward's frown every time I spoke. I'd done it because I loved Clara, because I thought she saw me even if they didn't. But tonight, with the burn on my face and her words ringing in my ears, I saw the truth. She didn't see me either. She saw a role I was supposed to play, quiet, agreeable, invisible. I paced the balcony, my shoes scuffing the stone, my mind racing. The anger was still there, hot and alive, but beneath it was something else, disgust, maybe, or exhaustion. I'd shrunk myself for them, for her, until I barely recognized the man I'd become. I thought about my dad, how he'd taught me to stand up straight, to shake hands firm, to look people in the eye. He'd died 3 years ago, and I wondered what he'd say if he saw me now, letting a guy like Julian walk all over me. My mom's voice echoed too. She'd always said, Miles, you're enough. But I hadn't felt enough here, not in this house, not with these people. I stopped pacing and gripped the railing, staring out at the shadows of the trees. Inside, someone turned up the music, soft jazz, the kind they played to pretend they were classy. Clara's laugh cut through again, and it hit me like a punch. They were fine without me. They didn't need me in there, and maybe I didn't need to be. My hand slipped into my pocket, brushing against my wallet. I pulled it out, flipped it open. A few 20s, my driver's license, Clara's emergency credit card she'd given me last year just in case. I'd never used it. Pride, I guess, but now it felt like a lifeline. I didn't have a plan, not really, but the idea of staying here, of going back inside to grovel, made my stomach turn. I grabbed my phone again, ignored Clara's text, and opened the Maps app. The nearest airport was an hour away. I could drive there. I could leave. The thought hit me hard, reckless, wild. Leave? Just like that? No bags, no explanations? My heart pounded, half from fear, half from something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I glanced back at the window, at the warm light spilling out, at the life I'd been clinging to. Clara's voice floated up again, saying something about dessert. She hadn't come out here. No one had. I was alone, and for the first time, that didn't scare me. It woke me up. I slipped my wallet back into my pocket, took one last look at the estate, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the glowing windows, the world that never wanted me, and made up my mind. I wasn't going back inside. Not tonight, maybe not ever. I walked down the balcony stairs to the driveway where my car sat, a beat-up sedan that stuck out among their BMWs and Teslas. The keys were still in my jacket. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. The rearview mirror showed the estate shrinking behind me, and with every mile, the burn on my face hurt a little less. I didn't know where I was going, not yet, but I knew I wasn't staying. Not for her, not for them, not for the man they wanted me to be. The highway stretched out in front of me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Connecticut night, the dashboard clock glowing 11:47 p.m. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my old sedan, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and the hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me company. My face still throbbed where Julian's coffee had hit me, a dull ache that pulsed with every heartbeat, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I'd left the Whitmore estate behind, the mansion shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just a speck of light swallowed by the dark. Clara's text, come back inside. You're making this worse, sat unanswered on my phone, tossed onto the passenger seat. I didn't owe her an explanation. Not after she'd stood there, watching her brother burn me, and told me to apologize. The road signs blurred past, Hartford, 20 miles, New York, 87 miles, but I wasn't heading home to our condo. That wasn't home anymore, just a cage with better furniture. I needed out, far out, somewhere they couldn't reach me. The airport popped into my head again, a crazy idea that had taken root on the balcony and wouldn't let go. I'd never done anything this impulsive. 6 years with Clara had been about plans, schedules, dinners, her family's endless events. But now, with the wind whistling through the cracked window and the burn on my face screaming for something to change, I pressed the gas harder. Bradley International Airport was close, an hour's drive, maybe less if I pushed it. My phone buzzed again, another text, probably Clara, maybe Beatrix this time, ready to lecture me about manners. I didn't look. I turned it off instead, holding the power button until the screen went black. Silence. Real silence. Just me and the road. When I pulled into the airport parking lot, the neon signs buzzed overhead, and the air smelled like jet fuel and rain. I grabbed my wallet and the dead phone, locked the car, and walked toward the terminal. My reflection caught in the glass doors, coffee-stained shirt, red face, hair a mess. I looked like a guy who'd lost it, and maybe I had. Inside, the ticket counter was quiet, just a tired-looking woman in a blue uniform tapping at her computer. Next flight out, I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. She raised an eyebrow. Anywhere specific? I shook my head. International. One way. She clicked a few keys, her eyes flicking to my stained shirt, then back to the screen. Paris. Leaves in 2 hours. Got a passport? I nodded, pulling it from my wallet. Clara had insisted I keep it there after a trip to London she dragged me on 2 years ago. That'll do, I said. She typed some more, asked for the credit card, Clara's emergency one. And I handed it over without a second thought. The machine beeped, the ticket printed, and she slid it across the counter. Gate 47. Better hurry. I took it, my fingers brushing the paper, and felt a jolt, like this was real, like I was actually doing it. Paris. I'd never been, never even dreamed of it, but it sounded far enough. I turned my phone back on as I walked toward security, just to check the time, and the flood hit. 215 notifications in 5 minutes. Missed calls from Clara, voicemails, texts stacking up like bricks. Where are you? Miles, answer me. This isn't funny. Julian's name popped up too. You're done, man. I'll sue you for everything you've got. Beatrix left a voicemail, her voice dripping with venom. Miles, you ungrateful little nobody. How dare you leave like this? And Clara again. You're embarrassing us. Come back now. I stood there, the terminal buzzing around me. Businessmen with briefcases, families with whining kids, and scrolled through it all. Every message was about them, their pride, their image. Not one asked if I was okay. Not one cared about the burn on my face or the years I'd spent trying to belong. My thumb hovered over the mute button. I pressed it. The buzzing stopped, the screen dimmed, and I shoved the phone into my pocket. Security was quick, shoes off, wallet in the bin, a bored TSA guy waving me through. I grabbed my stuff and headed for gate 47, the ticket crinkling in my hand. The boarding call crackled over the intercom. Flight 618 to Paris Charles de Gaulle, now boarding Group B. That was me. I joined the line, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. Clara's face flashed in my head, her sharp cheekbones, her blue eyes that used to soften when she looked at me. I waited for the guilt to hit, the pull to turn back, to call her and say I was sorry. It didn't come. Instead, I saw Julian's smirk, the coffee hitting my skin, Clara's cold stare. I handed my ticket to the agent, a young guy with a buzz cut who didn't even look at me. Enjoy your flight, he mumbled. I nodded, stepped onto the jetway, and felt the weight lift, just a little, but enough. The plane was half full, rows of sleepy passengers settling in. I found my seat, 23C, an aisle spot next to a woman already asleep with a scarf over her face. I buckled in, leaned back, and closed my eyes. The engines rumbled, the cabin lights dimmed, and for the first time in hours, I breathed. Paris. A one-way ticket. No plan, no Clara, no Whitmores. Just me, Miles Harrington, 34, burned and bruised, but finally moving. The plane taxied, lifted off, and I didn't look back. Not at the gate, not at the life I'd left. I was gone, and it felt right. The plane touched down in Paris just as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky a soft pink I hadn't seen in years. I stepped off into Charles de Gaulle Airport, my legs stiff from the 7-hour flight, my face still tender from Julian's coffee attack. My shirt was a wrinkled mess, stained brown and smelling faintly of burned beans, but I didn't care. No one here knew me. No one judged me for looking like I'd slept in a ditch. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of jet fuel and something sweeter, maybe croissants from a nearby kiosk. I had no bags, just my wallet, my dead phone, and a passport I'd barely used. I'd landed in a city where I didn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, and for the first time in forever, that felt like a gift. I wandered through the terminal, past signs I couldn't read, until I found a currency exchange. I swapped the last of my dollars for euros, crisp bills that felt foreign in my hand, and grabbed a coffee from a stand, careful to hold it far from my face this time. The burn on my cheek itched under the fluorescent lights, but I ignored it. I needed a place to crash, somewhere cheap and quiet, so I pulled up an app on my phone, using the airport Wi-Fi since I hadn't turned the data back on. Clara's messages were still there, lurking, but I didn't open them. I booked an Airbnb in the 11th arrondissement, a small studio with a bed, a sink, and a window overlooking a courtyard. The host, a guy named Pierre, said I could check in early. I took a cab from the airport, the driver rattling off French I didn't understand, and watched the city unfold. Narrow streets, stone buildings, people smoking on corners like they had nowhere to be. When I got to the place, it was exactly as promised. Simple, clean, mine for now. I dropped my wallet on the table, kicked off my shoes, and stood by the window, staring at the cobblestones below. No Whitmores, no Clara, no expectations. Just me. That first day, I walked. No map, no plan, just my feet on the ground, the cold biting through my jacket. I found a market near Bastille, stalls piled with bread, cheese, apples redder than any I'd seen back home. I bought a coffee, black, strong, and a baguette, tearing off pieces as I went. The Seine glittered under a gray sky, boats drifting slow and lazy, and I sat on a bench, watching them pass. People moved around me. Old men in berets, kids chasing pigeons, couples arguing in fast French, and I felt invisible in the best way. No one cared about my burned face or my stained shirt. No one knew I'd punched my brother-in-law and walked out on my wife. I could breathe here. By the third day, I'd settled into a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, walks through the city, quiet nights in the studio. I kept my phone off, letting the battery die completely. I didn't want to hear Clara's voice, didn't want Julian's threats or Beatrix's guilt trips. I'd check it eventually, but not yet. That afternoon, I stumbled into a bookstore off a side street, its windows fogged with age, a bell jingling as I pushed the door open. The woman behind the counter looked up, dark hair tied back, glasses perched on her nose, maybe 40. "Bonjour," she said, her voice soft but curious. I nodded, unsure how to respond, and she switched to English. "You're new here?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Just landed." She smiled, faint but warm, and introduced herself as Isabelle Marchand, the owner. "You read?" she asked, gesturing to the shelves. "Used to," I admitted. "Not much lately." She walked over, pulled a thin book from a stack, and handed it to me, The Stranger by Camus. "Start with this. It's for people who don't know what they think anymore." I took it, surprised by how right she was. "Camus or Sartre?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "I don't know," I said, flipping the book over in my hands. "Then you'll like both," she replied, and that was that. We talked for a while, nothing deep, just books, the weather, how Paris winters bite harder than you expect. She didn't ask about my past, didn't pry about the red mark on my face that was starting to fade. It was the first real conversation I'd had in days, maybe weeks, that didn't feel like a test. I bought the book, thanked her, and left with a promise to come back. That night, I sat on the studio's lumpy bed, the book open on my lap, the cheap lamp casting shadows on the wall. I read the first page, then the second, the words sinking in slow and heavy. Massault, the guy in the story, didn't care what people thought. He just lived, even when it made no sense. I envied that. I'd spent years caring too much, twisting myself into knots for Clara's family, for her approval. And where had it gotten me? Burned and alone, sure, but now I was here, in Paris, with a book in my hands and a city outside that didn't need me to prove anything. I closed the book, set it on the table, and looked out the window again. The courtyard was dark, a cat slinking across the stones, and I felt something shift, not peace, not yet, but a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Isabelle's voice stuck with me, for people who don't know what they think anymore. That was me, all right. But maybe here, In this city of strangers and first breaths, I could figure it out. One page, one day, one step at a time. Rain tapped against the window of my little Paris studio, a steady rhythm that matched the dull ache in my chest as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. It had been dead for days, tucked in a drawer like a bomb I didn't want to touch. I'd been in Paris a week now, settling into this strange new life, coffee in the mornings, walks along the Seine, quiet talks with Isabel at her bookstore. But the silence from my old world couldn't last forever. I knew Clara wouldn't let it. My fingers hesitated over the charger, then plugged it in. The screen lit up, and within seconds, it was chaos, pings and buzzes, a flood of notifications that made my stomach twist. I'd muted them before I left, but now they were back, clawing at me. I sat there, the room dim except for the glow of the phone, and braced myself. First came the missed calls, dozens from Clara, a few from Beatrix, even one from Edward, which surprised me. He never called, just glared across tables like I was a stain on his legacy. Then the texts Clara's name over and over, a wall of words I didn't want to read but couldn't ignore. Miles, where are you? We need to talk. You can't just run off like this. We can fix this. You embarrass me. Julian's furious. Come back and make this right. I scrolled, my throat tightening with every line. Not one asked if I was hurt. If the burn on my face still stung, it didn't. Much. Just a faint pink now, or if I was okay after what happened. It was all about them, their feelings, their perfect little world I dared to disrupt. Beatrix had emailed too, a long one titled, Your Behavior, and I opened it because I couldn't help myself. Miles, it started. Your actions at the reunion were deplorable. We welcomed you into our family, gave you opportunities you'd never have dreamed of, and this is how you repay us? Running off like a child? Clara's devastated. I've attached a list of therapists, please seek help. I stopped reading, closed it, let the phone drop onto the bed. Therapists. Like I was the one who needed fixing, not the guy who'd scalded me, not the wife who'd told me to apologize for it. Julian had posted on X too. I saw it when I checked the app, a photo of his bruised jaw with the caption, some people crack under pressure. Sad. Likes and comments piled up, mostly from Whitmore cousins and friends, all agreeing I was the villain. I didn't reply. What was the point? They'd made up their minds years ago. I was the outsider, the guy who didn't belong, and now I'd given them proof. I stood up, paced the small room, the wooden floor creaking under my socks. The rain outside was heavier now, streaking the glass, and I felt trapped, not by Paris, but by the weight of them still reaching for me. I couldn't keep living like this, tethered to their voices, their judgment. So I made a choice. I walked to a shop near the metro, bought a French SIM card with a new number, and swapped it into my phone. The old one, the American one tied to Clara and the Whitmores, I tossed into a drawer. No more notifications, no more guilt trips. I needed work too. Clara's credit card wouldn't last forever, and I wasn't about to beg her for money. I found a co-working space near Montmartre, a cramped room with fast Wi-Fi and freelancers hunched over laptops. I logged into my old freelance accounts, software gigs I'd done before Clara convinced me to take a real job at her friend's firm and pitch for projects. Simple stuff, debugging, app updates, things I could do with my eyes closed. By evening, I had 2 clients, enough to cover rent and food for a while. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights blurred by the rain, and opened my phone again. The family group chat was still there, years of messages, forced holiday plans, Beatrix's passive-aggressive reminders about dress codes. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, then hit delete. The thread vanished, and with it, a knot in my chest loosened. I didn't need their updates. Didn't need to know what Julian thought of my tantrum or how Clara was spinning this to her friends. I was done. The next day, I walked along the canal, the water gray and choppy, the air cold against my face. I stopped at a bridge, leaned on the railing, and watched a boat glide underneath. A guy was fishing nearby, his line bobbing in the current, and he nodded at me like we were old pals. I nodded back. It was small, stupid maybe, but it felt good, better than any Whitmore handshake ever had. I kept walking, past cafes with steamed-up windows, past kids kicking a soccer ball in an alley. I bought a coffee, sat on a bench, and let the city hum around me. My new number buzzed, a client confirming a deadline. No Clara, no Julian, just work, just me. I sipped the coffee, careful not to spill, and thought about Isabel's book, The Stranger, still half-read on my table. Basalt didn't care about pleasing anyone. He just existed. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel it starting. This letting go. Paris didn't need me to be anything but here, and for now, that was enough. I finished the coffee, tossed the cup, and kept walking, the rain a soft drumbeat behind me. A month in Paris had changed me, not in big, loud ways, but in the quiet ones that sneak up on you. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the city, the clatter of metro trains, the smell of bread wafting from bakeries, the way strangers nodded instead of smiled. My studio in the 11th arrondissement was home now, its creaky bed and chipped sink familiar in a way Clara's polished condo never was. The burn on my face had faded to a faint pink scar, barely noticeable unless you looked close, and I didn't mind it anymore. It was proof I'd survived something. But there were pieces of me still back in New York, things I couldn't leave behind forever. Not the life with Clara, not the Whitmore world. I was done with that. But the small stuff that mattered. My dad's wooden toolbox, scratched and heavy with memories of him showing me how to fix a leaky faucet. The books I'd read in college, dog-eared paperbacks that got me through late nights. My mom's old Polaroid camera, the one she'd used to snap blurry shots of me as a kid. I'd left them in the condo when I bolted, and now, sitting by the window watching Paris wake up, I knew I had to go back for them. Not to stay, not to fix things, just to reclaim what was mine. I booked a round-trip flight that morning, using the last of Clara's credit card before my freelance money kicked in. The plan was simple. Fly in, get my stuff, fly out. No talking, no fighting, just in and out. The flight back was long, the cabin air stale, and I kept my head down, avoiding the chatty guy next to me who wanted to talk about wine. Landing in New York felt like stepping into a memory I didn't want. JFK's chaos, the gray skyline, the weight of everything I'd run from. I took a cab to the condo, my key still on the ring, and stood outside the building for a minute, staring up at the windows. Our place, hers now, was on the 5th floor, and I wondered if she'd changed the locks. It was mid-afternoon, a Tuesday, and I figured she'd be at work, but when I turned the key and pushed the door open, there she was. Clara, standing in the kitchen, a glass of water in her hand, her eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. "Miles," she said, her voice soft, shaky. "You came back." I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and kept my tone flat. "Just for my things." She set the glass down, her blonde hair pulled back tight, her face thinner than I remembered. She was still beautiful, but it didn't hit me the way it used to. "You don't have to do this," she said, stepping closer. "We can talk." Julian apologized. He didn't mean it. "We can go to therapy, figure this out." I shook my head, moving past her to the hall closet where I'd stashed my stuff. "You watched him burn me, Clara. You told me to apologize." She followed, her voice rising. "I was upset. It was a mess, okay? But running off to God knows where. That's not how you fix things." I pulled out 2 cardboard boxes from under the stairs, the ones I'd used when I moved in, and started packing. The toolbox first. Its weight felt good in my hands, solid, real. "I'm not fixing anything," I said, not looking at her. "I'm done." She stood there, arms crossed, her breath hitching like she might cry. "You're throwing us away." 6 years, Miles. I grabbed the books next, On the Road, The Catcher in the Rye, and stacked them in the box. "You threw me away first," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "When you picked them over me." She didn't say anything to that, just watched as I found the Polaroid camera on a shelf, its strap tangled, and tucked it in with the rest. The silence was heavy, thicker than the Paris rain, and I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I taped the boxes shut, one then the other, and carried them to the door. "I'll send divorce papers," I said, finally meeting her gaze. Her eyes were wet, her mouth open like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "Miles," she whispered, "I didn't mean for this." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because it didn't matter anymore. "Take care, Clara." I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, and hauled the boxes to the cab waiting downstairs. The driver didn't ask questions, just loaded them in the trunk, and I slid into the back seat, the city blurring past as we headed to the airport. My flight back to Paris was that night, and I spent it staring out the window, the Atlantic black below me. When I landed, the familiar chill of Paris hit me, and I took a cab to the studio, dragging the boxes up the narrow stairs. I set them by the bed, opened the toolbox, and ran my fingers over the hammer my dad had used to build our porch. The book smelled like dust and late nights, the camera like my mom's perfume. These were mine, not Clara's, not the Whitmores, just mine. I sat there, the city quiet outside, and felt a weight settle, not heavy, but grounding. I'd gone back, faced her, and walked away again. No yelling, no begging, just me taking what I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Miles Harrington, not Clara's husband, not the Whitmore punching bag. Just me. Back in Paris, the air felt lighter, like the city had been waiting for me to come home. I'd left the studio in the 11th arrondissement for something better, a small apartment in Belleville, a working-class neighborhood with graffiti on the walls and music spilling from open windows. It was a two-room place above a bakery, with a tiny kitchen, a bed that didn't creak, and a view of the street where old men played chess on folding tables. I'd used my freelance money to pay the deposit, no more leaning on Clara's credit card, and when I carried my 2 boxes from New York up the stairs, it felt like a fresh start. The toolbox, the books, the Polaroid camera, they found spots on a shelf I'd bought from a second-hand shop, and I liked seeing them there, pieces of me that didn't belong to anyone else. A few days after settling in, I stopped by Isabel's bookstore to return the stranger. She was behind the counter, sorting a stack of paperbacks, and looked up with that faint smile of hers. "Finished it?" she asked, taking the book. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the shelf. "Made me think too much." She laughed, a quiet sound, and said, "That's the point." We talked for a while about Camus, about Paris, about how the rain here soaks you to the bone, and then she mentioned her friend Theo, who ran a tech repair shop a few streets over. "He's swamped," she said. "Could use someone good with computers." I perked up. My freelance gigs were steady, but I missed working with my hands, fixing things like my dad taught me. "Think he'd talk to me?" I asked. She nodded, scribbled an address on a scrap of paper, and handed it over. "Tell him I sent you." The next day, I walked to Theo's shop, a narrow storefront with a sign that read, "Reparations Tech," in peeling paint. Inside, it was a mess, tables piled with cracked laptops, phone screens, tangled cords. Theo was a wiry guy, maybe 35, with a beard and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. "You Miles?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah," I said. "Isabel sent me." He sized me up, then pointed to a computer in the corner. "Set up a system for me, inventory, invoices, something simple. I'm drowning here." I got to work, pulling up code on an old desktop, tweaking it until it tracked his stock and spit out receipts. It took a couple hours, Theo watching over my shoulder, grunting approval now and then. When I finished, he clapped me on the back. "Good. You want a job? Part-time, cash, no bullshit." I grinned, the first real smile in weeks. "Yeah, I'm in." That was the start of it. Mornings at the shop, afternoons freelancing from the co-working space, evenings walking the city. I'd leave the apartment early, grab a coffee from the bakery downstairs, and head to Theo's, where I'd fix phones or debug software while he smoked and told stories about growing up in Belleville. It wasn't glamorous, no dress code, no corner office, but it was honest. I liked the feel of a screwdriver in my hand again, the satisfaction of a screen flickering back to life. Clara never let me do this kind of work. She'd called it beneath us, pushed me into suits and meetings I hated. Here, no one cared how I held my coffee cup or if my shoes were polished. One night, after a long day at the shop, I sat at my kitchen table, the window open to let in the cool air. My phone, the new French number, buzzed with a text from Theo. "Beer tomorrow?" I typed back, "Sure." Simple, easy, no strings. I didn't check my old email much anymore, but I opened it that night, just to see. Clara's messages had slowed. "Fewer please, more clipped updates. Lawyer says you need to sign. Mom's still mad." I didn't reply. Her voice was fading, not gone but distant, like a radio station I'd tuned out. I closed the laptop, grabbed my dad's toolbox, and pulled out a wrench, turning it over in my hands. He'd been a mechanic, rough around the edges but good, and I wondered what he'd think of me now halfway across the world, starting over. He'd probably laugh, say, "About damn time, kid." My mom would have hugged me, told me I was enough. I missed them both, but having their things here, in this little apartment, made it bearable. The next day, I met Theo at a bar near the canal, a dive with sticky tables and cheap wine. We drank, talked about nothing, soccer, the weather, a busted printer at the shop, and I felt lighter than I had in years. No one asked about my past, my marriage, my scars. I walked home late, the streets quiet, the city mine in a way New York never was. Back in the apartment, I stood by the window, watching a couple argue below, their voices sharp but muffled. I didn't need to understand the words to know it wasn't my fight. I built something here, a job, a place, a rhythm, and it was small, messy, real. Clara's emails could sit unread, the Whitmores could stew in their mansion, and I'd keep going. I climbed into bed, the toolbox on the shelf glinting in the moonlight, and slept better than I had in months. This was my room, my life, and I wasn't apologizing for it. The Paris sky was a heavy gray that morning, the kind that promises rain but holds off just to keep you guessing. I stood in my Belleville apartment, the smell of coffee from the bakery below drifting up through the open window, and stared at an envelope I'd pulled from a pile of mail. It was handwritten, the paper thick and creamy, scented with something floral that hit me like a memory I didn't want. Beatrix's name was on the return address, Clara's mother, the queen of guilt trips and backhanded compliments. I hadn't heard from her directly in weeks, not since her last email about therapists, and I'd hoped she'd given up. No such luck. I tore it open, the paper crisp under my fingers, and unfolded a single page. Her handwriting was perfect, slanted, like she'd practiced it for this moment. Miles, it began, you humiliated our family. You walked out when Clara needed you most. We gave you everything, a place at our table, a chance to rise above your station, and you threw it in our faces. I hope you're proud of yourself, living like some vagabond while we pick up the pieces. I stopped reading, the words blurring into a familiar venom I didn't need to finish. She'd always seen me as less than Julian, less than Clara, less than the Whitmore name, and this was her last shot, a perfumed dagger mailed across an ocean. I crumpled it, walked to the door, and headed out. The Seine wasn't far, a 10-minute walk through Belleville's winding streets, and I needed to move, to shake her voice out of my head. The river was choppy that day, the water slapping against the stone banks, and I stood on a bridge, the letter still balled in my fist. I thought about Clara, her thin face when I'd gone back for my things, her pleas for therapy, and Beatrix's version of everything. They'd given me a seat, sure, but it came with a leash, smile, nod, take the insults, shrink. I didn't know them pride or shame. I dropped the letter into the water, watched it hit the surface and sink, the ink bleeding into nothing. It felt good, final, like cutting a rope I'd been tangled in too long. That night, I met Theo and Isabel on a rooftop bar near the shop, a place with mismatched chairs and a view of the city's jagged skyline. Theo brought a bottle of cheap red wine, Isabel a loaf of bread she'd baked herself, crusty and warm. We sat under a string of bare bulbs, the air cool, the noise of Paris humming below. Theo poured the wine into plastic cups, handed me one, and said, "You're quiet tonight." I shrugged, tearing off a piece of bread. Got a letter from my ex's mom. Same old crap. Isabel raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine. What did she say? That I'm a disgrace, I said, keeping it light, though it still stung. Thinks I should have stayed and begged forgiveness. Theo snorted, leaning back in his chair. For what? Sounds like they're the ones who should beg. I nodded, chewing the bread, its taste sharp and simple. Yeah, well, they don't see it that way. Isabel set her cup down, her glasses catching the light. You look lighter, though, even with the letter. I paused, surprised she'd noticed. I feel it, I said, and it was true. The weight of Beatrix's words, Clara's silence, Julian's smirk, it was still there, but fainter, like a bruise fading. We drank more, the wine warming my chest, and talked about nothing important, Theo's latest repair disaster, Isabel's new shipment of books. No one asked me to explain myself, to justify why I'd left or what I was doing here. They just let me be. Later, as the city lights blinked on, Theo lit a cigarette and said, "You're good at the shop, man. Stick around." It wasn't a big thing, but it hit me hard, someone wanting me there, not for what I could prove, but for what I could do. I got home late, the apartment dark except for the glow of a street lamp outside. I kicked off my shoes, stood by the shelf where my dad's toolbox sat, and ran my hand over it. The letter was gone, dissolved in the Seine, and with it, the last thread of Beatrix's hold. I didn't need her approval, didn't need Claire's either. I had this, Theo's shop, Isabel's books, a life I was building piece by piece. The next day, I went to work, fixed a cracked laptop screen, and laughed when Theo spilled coffee on his own shirt, cursing in French. After, I walked to the co-working space, finished a freelance job, and stopped by the bakery for a baguette. It was routine now, steady, mine. I didn't check my old email anymore, Clara's updates, Beatrix's rants, they could pile up unread. That night, I sat at my table, the Polaroid camera in front of me, and loaded a fresh pack of film I'd bought on a whim. I snapped a shot of the street below, blurry, imperfect, real, and pinned it to the wall. It was the first picture I'd taken in years, and it felt like a start. Paris had given me room to breathe, to be Miles again, not the guy who'd shrunk for the Whitmores. Beatrix's letter was the last echo of that old life, and I'd let it sink. I didn't need their table, I had my own. The Belleville apartment had become my anchor, its chipped walls and slanted floors more home than the condo with Clara ever was. 9 months in Paris had stripped away the man I'd been, Miles Harrington, the quiet husband who nodded at insults, who wore ties he hated to dinners he dreaded. Now, I woke to the clatter of the bakery downstairs, the shouts of kids playing soccer in the street, and I liked it. I'd changed my number legally last week, cutting the final thread to my old American SIM, the one Clara and the Whitmores could still reach. The French residence card came through too, a flimsy piece of plastic that said I belonged here, at least for now. It wasn't about becoming someone new, it was about remembering who I'd been before I let compromise grind me down. That morning, I stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee in a pot I'd bought for €5 at a flea market, and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling. The toolbox sat on its shelf, the Polaroid camera next to it, both quiet reminders of my parents, my dad's steady hands, my mom's soft laugh. I'd started using the camera more, snapping shots of Paris, a pigeon on a bench, a cracked cobblestone, Theo swearing at a busted printer. The pictures lined my wall now, a messy collage of this new life. Work kept me busy, mornings at Theo's shop, afternoons freelancing, and lately, something extra. Theo's niece, a shy 12-year-old named Lucy, had asked me to teach her how to build a website. We'd started last month, sitting at the shop's back table with my laptop, me showing her code line by line. She grinned when her first page loaded, a bright pink screen with Lucy's World in block letters, and I'd felt a pride I hadn't known in years. It was small, but it mattered. That afternoon, I met her again, bringing a bag of pastries from the bakery as a bribe. She was waiting, her hair in a messy braid, her eyes bright. "Can we have pictures?" she asked, bouncing in her chair. "Yeah," I said, pulling up the code. "Pick some from your phone." She uploaded shots of her dog, a scruffy mutt named Bruno, and I showed her how to size them, align them, make them pop. When we finished, she hugged me quick, awkward, the way kids do, and ran off to show Theo. He poked his head out later, smirking. "You're stuck with her now, man." I laughed. Fine by me. Teaching her reminded me of my dad, how he'd patiently explain tools to me, and it patched a hole I didn't know I had. Later, I walked the city, the Polaroid slung around my neck. I'd gotten good at finding moments. A woman feeding ducks by the canal, a guy juggling oranges outside a market. I snapped them, watched the film spit out, and tucked the prints into my pocket. It was something mine, not tied to Clara or her family's expectations. That night, I sat at my table, the latest photo, a blurry shot of a street musician, drawing in front of me. My laptop was open, and I stared at an email I'd been avoiding. It was to my lawyer, a draft I'd written weeks ago, finalized the divorce. No assets, no fights, just end it. I'd hesitated because part of me still heard Clara's voice, soft and pleading, from that day in the condo. But it wasn't enough anymore. I edited the message, kept it short, and hit send. No fanfare, no second thoughts, just a clean break. The next day, I went to Theo's shop, fixed a phone with a shattered screen, and listened to him rant about a soccer match. Isabel stopped by with coffee, her glasses fogged from the cold, and we talked about books, Sartre this time, how heavy his stuff was. "You're different," she said, out of nowhere, as she handed me a cup. "How?" I asked, taking it. "Less haunted," she said, shrugging. "Like you're here now, not half somewhere else." I nodded, sipping the coffee, warm and bitter. She was right. The Whitmores, Clara, the old me. They were ghosts, fading every day I spent here. I didn't check my old email anymore. Didn't wonder what Julian was posting or what Beatrix was scheming. They didn't matter. That evening, I walked home slow, the city alive around me. Lights flickering on, voices spilling from cafes. I stopped at a bridge, leaned on the railing, and watched the Seine flow, dark and steady. I'd let go of the man who'd tried to fit where he wasn't wanted, the one who'd apologized for existing. Paris hadn't saved me. It had just given me space to save myself. I pulled the Polaroid from my neck, aimed it at the water, and clicked. The picture slid out, a smear of black and gray, and I kept it anyway. It was mine, like this life, flaws and all. Back in the apartment, I pinned it to the wall, next to Lucy's pink website code I'd printed as a joke. The divorce would come through soon. Papers in the mail, a signature, done. No calls, No drama. I didn't need Clara's okay to be me again. I climbed into bed, the street quiet outside, and slept deep, the weight of 9 months lifting. I was Miles Harrington, 34, not a Whitmore appendage, not a husband in name only, just a guy with a camera, a job, a kid who thought I was cool. And that was enough. A year in Paris had carved me into someone I recognized again, someone I liked. I'd moved up from the small Belleville apartment to a 2-bedroom loft above Theo's repair shop, a place with high ceilings, creaky floors, and a window that framed the city like a painting. The rent was cheap. Theo cut me a deal since I kept his systems running, and the extra room held my dad's toolbox, my mom's Polaroid camera, and a growing stack of books from Isabel's shop. I woke early most days, the sun slipping through the blinds, and brewed coffee in a pot that rattled on the stove. The shop downstairs hummed by 8, Theo banging tools and cursing in French, and I'd join him after my first cup, fixing phones or tweaking software while the street outside buzzed with life. That morning, I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching a guy sweep the sidewalk below, his broom kicking up dust that caught the light. A year ago, I'd been on a plane, burned and broken, running from Clara and her family. Now, I was here, rooted in a life I'd built from scratch. The divorce had come through months back, papers signed, no fights, just a quiet end mailed to my lawyer. Clara's last message arrived yesterday, a short text to my old number that I'd seen when I checked it for a client's contact. I hope you're okay. It landed soft, not sharp like her old please, and I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She was a shadow now, not a weight, and I let her fade. Work kept me steady, Theo's shop was busier than ever, and I'd taken on more hours, my hands as comfortable with a soldering iron as they'd been with code. Lucy still came by, her website now a sprawling mess of dog pics and bad poetry, and I'd grin every time she showed me a new page. You're famous, she'd say, pointing to her About section where she'd listed me as tech guy Miles. It made me laugh, the kind of laugh that felt easy, not forced. Freelancing filled the gaps, small gigs that paid the bills and left me time to walk the city with my camera. I'd filled a shoebox with Polaroids, bridges, strangers, Theo mid-rant, and pinned the best ones to the loft's walls. They weren't art, just moments, but they were mine. That afternoon, I met Isabel at her bookstore, the bell jingling as I walked in. She was shelving a stack of battered novels, her hair tied back with a scarf. Coffee? She asked, nodding toward a thermos on the counter. Always, I said, pouring a cup. We sat by the window, the street outside alive with delivery bikes and shouting vendors, and talked about nothing big, her latest read, my latest repaired job. You're staying then, she said, out of the blue, her eyes on me over her glasses. Yeah, I said, surprised by how sure I sounded. This is home now. She smiled, small but real. Good. Paris suits you. It did. Not the tourist Paris, Eiffel Tower selfies and overpriced wine, but the real one, the one with cracked pavements and late-night bars, the one that didn't care who I'd been before. Later, I walked the canal, the water glinting under a rare clear sky, and stopped at a bench to watch the boats drift. A kid kicked a ball nearby, his mom yelling at him to slow down, and I snapped a Polaroid of it, the blur of his sneaker against the gray stones. I didn't miss New York, didn't miss the condo or the Whitmore estate. I missed my parents sometimes, their voices, but I had their things, the toolbox, the camera, and that kept them close. That night, I cooked dinner in the loft, a simple pasta with sauce from a jar, and ate at the table by the window. The shop was quiet below, Theo gone home, and the street settled into a soft hum. My phone buzzed, a text from Lucy. Bruno ate my shoe. Pick soon. I laughed, typed back, can't wait. No calls from Clara, no emails from Beatrix, just this, friends, work, a life that fit. I cleaned up, grabbed the Polaroid, and stepped onto the fire escape, the metal cold under my feet. The river wasn't far, its curve visible past the rooftops, and I aimed the camera, clicked. The shot came out dark, just a smear of lights and water, but I kept it, tucking it into my pocket. A year ago, I'd been Miles Harrington, the guy who took Julian's coffee to the face and Clara's silence to the heart. I bought that one-way ticket, landed here, and rebuilt. Not perfect, not fancy, just real. I didn't apologize anymore, didn't shrink. I worked, I walked, I lived. Back inside, I pinned the river shot to the wall, next to a picture of Theo flipping me off and one of Lucy's dog mid-bark. The loft smelled like coffee and solder, the city breathed outside, and I climbed into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Claire's "I hope you're okay" echoed once, faint, then slipped away. I was okay, better than okay. I was me, and Paris held me steady. Sleep came fast, deep, the river's quiet song in my bones. I found men's lubricant in my wife's bag. I didn't make a fuss. I just secretly replaced it with super glue. What happened next? You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes foresight can be pretty damn clear too, especially when your gut's been screaming at you for months that something's off. But did I listen? Hell no. I was too busy being the good husband, the trusting fool, the guy who actually believed his wife when she said she was working late for the fourth time that week. It was a Tuesday night, which should have been my first red flag because nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. I was sprawled on our king-size bed, the one we'd picked out together at that overpriced furniture store where the salesman had the audacity to suggest we'd make beautiful memories on it. Yeah, well, turns out Marissa was making memories all right, just not with me. I was drifting in that weird half-asleep state where you're not quite unconscious, but your brain's already started playing those bizarre pre-dream movies when I heard the shower kick on. Again, this was her second shower of the day, which struck me as odd because Marissa wasn't exactly what you'd call a cleanliness freak. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't gross or anything, but she was more of a shower every other day unless I'm going somewhere important kind of woman. So 2 showers in one day. My subconscious filed that away under things that make you go The water was still running when something caught my eye. Her handbag sitting on the chair by our dresser, looking like it had exploded. The thing was unzipped, and half its contents were spilling out onto the floor like some kind of suburban crime scene. Lip gloss, receipts, hair ties, and what looked like half the pharmacy's travel size section scattered across our hardwood floor. Now, I'm not usually the type to go rifling through my wife's purse. That's like the cardinal sin of marriage, right up there with leaving the toilet seat up and forgetting anniversaries. But the mess was bothering me, and I figured I'd be the considerate husband and clean it up before she came out and started stress cleaning at midnight like she sometimes did when work got crazy. So there I was, playing Good Samaritan, picking up tampons and breath mints and wondering why women need 17 different lip products that all look exactly the same, when my hand brushed against something that definitely didn't belong in the normal wife stuff category. It was small, cool to the touch, and had that sleek metal feeling that screamed expensive and purposeful. I pulled it out and held it up to the lamplight. A silver tube, maybe 4 inches long, with this minimalist design that looked like something Apple would make if they got into the personal lubricant business. The whole thing was covered in Japanese characters, bold and black against the silver metal. It looked expensive, the kind of thing you don't just pick up at the local CVS between buying milk and cough drops. My first thought was medical. Maybe she had some kind of issue she was embarrassed to talk about? Women's health stuff can be complicated, and God knows Marissa wasn't great at discussing anything that made her uncomfortable. But then again, if it was medical, why was it Japanese? And why hadn't she mentioned it? Curiosity officially killed the cat. I grabbed my phone and opened up the camera to scan the text. Google Translate is a beautiful thing when you're sitting in your bedroom at 11:30 at night, questioning everything you thought you knew about your marriage. The translation hit my screen, and I swear I felt my blood temperature drop about 10 degrees. Premium men's personal lubricant, long-lasting formula. Men's lubricant, not women's, not couples, men's. And it wasn't new. The tube was maybe half empty, with that slightly worn look that comes from regular use. I turned it over in my hands, my brain trying to process what I was looking at while my gut was already 3 steps ahead, screaming warnings I didn't want to hear. My wife had never bought anything like this for us. Hell, we barely used regular lubricant, and when we did, it was the basic stuff from the drugstore that came in those clinical-looking bottles. This thing looked like it cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and it sure as hell wasn't something she'd picked up for our bedroom activities. I sat there staring at this tube like it might suddenly sprout legs and explain itself. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe she'd bought it as a gag gift for someone's bachelor party. Maybe it belonged to a friend who'd left it in her purse by mistake. Maybe I was overthinking things because I'd been watching too many true crime documentaries lately. But then my eyes drifted over to her tablet, sitting innocently on the desk where she'd left it after working on some presentation slides earlier. The screen was still glowing, showing her home screen with all those neatly organized app folders she was so proud of. Everything had cute little names like Fun Stuff and Work Tools and Groceries. Wait, groceries? I'd never seen Marissa use a grocery app in my life. The woman who made me drive to 3 different stores because she insisted on getting the good brand of everything suddenly had a grocery folder on her tablet? That was like finding out your vegan friend had a secret hamburger stash. My hands were shaking as I tapped on the folder. Inside was a single app I'd never seen before, some kind of messaging platform with an icon that looked deliberately generic. My thumb hovered over it for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. This was it. This was the moment where I either found out I was being paranoid or I found out my entire life was a lie. I opened it. The chat history loaded, and right there at the top was a conversation with someone named Leo. The profile picture was just a silhouette, but the messages. Jesus Christ, the messages. Can't wait to see you Thursday. Got us the usual room at the Marriott. Bring that stuff I like. The silver one. Makes everything so much better. Going to do things to you that your husband never could. I scrolled up, my vision getting blurry around the edges as weeks of messages revealed themselves. Detailed descriptions of hotel rooms, explicit photos I definitely didn't want to see, and references to that exact brand of lubricant currently sitting in my sweating palm. The timestamps were like a punch to the gut. Every late night at the office, every girl's night out, every, I'm too tired tonight, honey. All of it was lies. The shower was still running, and I could hear Marissa humming some pop song like she didn't have a care in the world. Like she hadn't just blown up our entire marriage with a half-empty tube of Japanese lubricant and a secret chat app hidden in a fake grocery folder. I looked at the tube again, then at the messages, then back at the tube. My hands had stopped shaking and started moving with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. I walked quietly to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and pulled out the tube of industrial-grade super glue I'd bought for a home repair project last month. If Marissa wanted to play games with expensive foreign lubricants, then by God, I was going to give her an experience she'd never forget. The shower finally stopped. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and you want to scream at the dumb blonde not to go into the basement? Well, imagine being the dumb blonde, except instead of a basement, it's your own marriage, and instead of a serial killer, it's your cheating wife who's about to get the surprise of her lifetime. I'd just finished my little arts and crafts project in the kitchen. Let's call it Extreme Home Makeover, Lubricant Edition, when I heard the bathroom door open. The sound of bare feet padding across our hardwood floors made my heart race, but not in the romantic way it used to. More like the, I'm about to watch my life implode in real-time way. I scrambled back to bed, clutching that doctored tube of Japanese love juice like it was the holy grail of marital revenge. My hands were steadier now, which was weird because you'd think discovering your wife's secret affair would make you shakier, not calmer. But there's something about having a plan, even a completely insane plan, that brings a certain zen-like focus to a man's soul. Marissa emerged from the bathroom like she was auditioning for a shampoo commercial, all wrapped up in that fluffy white towel I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. The same towel that used to make my pulse quicken when it accidentally dropped during her post-shower routine. Now it just looked like a costume she was wearing to play the role of faithful wife. "Hey, babe," she said, and I swear her voice had that fake sweet quality that women use when they're trying to cover up something. You know the tone, the same one they use when they've accidentally spent $300 at Target but only went in for laundry detergent. "You look tired." "Tired? Lady, I just found out my entire marriage is a sham, and you think I look tired?" I wanted to laugh, but instead I just nodded and made some non-committal grunt that could have meant anything from, "Yeah, long day," to, "I know you're screwing some guy named Leo." She padded over to the kitchen. Our kitchen, in our house, that we bought together when we still believed in things like forever, until death do us part. I could hear her moving around, opening cabinets, running the faucet. The domestic sounds of a woman who was probably planning her next rendezvous while pretending to be a caring wife. A few minutes later, she came back with a tall glass of milk, holding it out to me like it was some kind of peace offering. "Here, drink this," she said, settling onto the edge of the bed. "It'll help you sleep better. You've got that early morning meeting tomorrow, right?" And there it was, the early morning meeting. The one I'd mentioned casually over dinner. The one she'd filed away in her cheating little brain as the perfect opportunity for another late-night adventure. Because nothing says devoted spouse like drugging your husband so you can sneak out for some extracurricular activities. I took the glass, studying her face in the dim light. She looked so sincere, so concerned about my sleep schedule. If I didn't know better, I'd think she actually gave a damn about my well-being. But I did know better now, didn't I? Thanks, honey, I said, taking a small sip. It tasted normal, but then again, I wasn't exactly an expert on what sleeping pills tasted like in milk. Could have been Ambien, could have been Benadryl, could have been nothing at all. But the fact that she was suddenly so concerned about my sleep when she'd never given two craps about my insomnia before, yeah, that was suspicious as hell. I made a show of drinking about half the glass, then set it on my nightstand with a grateful smile. You're the best, baby. I love you. The words felt like ash in my mouth, but her face lit up with what looked like genuine affection. That was the part that really got to me. Not just that she was cheating, but that she could look at me with those loving eyes while planning to slip out and get busy with some photographer named Leo. I love you too, she whispered, leaning over to kiss my forehead like I was a sick child instead of the husband she was about to betray. Again, she climbed into bed beside me, and I could feel the warmth of her body through that towel. Once upon a time, that would have been my cue to make a move, to pull her close and show her how much I missed her during those long days at the office. Now it just felt like lying next to a stranger wearing my wife's skin. Get some rest, she murmured, already turning away from me. You need your energy for tomorrow. Oh, the irony. She was worried about my energy levels while planning to spend half the night burning calories with Mr. Photography. I wanted to ask her if Leo knew she was drugging her husband, if that was part of their kinky little game, but instead I just mumbled something about being grateful and closed my eyes. The next hour was probably the longest 60 minutes of my life. I lay there listening to her breathing, waiting for it to settle into that deep, even rhythm that meant she thought I was out cold. Every few minutes, I'd let out a little snore or shift positions, really selling the whole heavily sedated husband performance. She was good, I'll give her that. She waited a full hour before making her move, probably making sure whatever she'd slipped me had enough time to kick in. I felt the mattress shift as she carefully climbed out of bed, moving with the stealth of someone who'd done this dance before. I cracked one eye open just enough to see her silhouette in the darkness. She'd traded the towel for a black dress, the sexy one she usually saved for our anniversary dinners. She was putting on makeup at the vanity, applying lipstick with the kind of care you reserve for special occasions. At exactly 12:45 a.m., I heard the soft click of our front door opening, then the faint sound of voices in the hallway outside our apartment. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it through the walls. I gave her exactly 20 seconds, long enough to think she was in the clear, but not long enough for them to disappear entirely. Then I slipped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept toward the door like some kind of suburban ninja. The hallway was dimly lit, but I could see them at the far end, near the elevator. Marissa was pressed against the wall, and some tall guy had his hands on either side of her face, kissing her like she was the last woman on earth. Even from a distance, I could see he was everything I wasn't: tall, muscular, probably 10 years younger than me. So this was Leo. This was the man my wife thought was worth throwing away 15 years of marriage for. They broke apart, and I heard her whisper something that made him laugh. Then they were walking toward the stairs, probably heading up to his place, or maybe down to a car. Either way, they were moving with the confidence of people who thought they'd pulled off the perfect crime. I waited until I heard the stairwell door close, then made my decision. The same clarity that had guided me in the kitchen was back, telling me exactly what I needed to do. I was going to follow them. After all, a man deserves to see exactly what he's losing, right? Let me tell you something about following your cheating wife through your own apartment building at 1 a.m. It's like being the star of the world's most depressing reality show. Keeping Up with the Adulterers, coming to a streaming service near you, featuring yours truly as the clueless husband who's about to get a front row seat to his own personal hell. I crept down the hallway like some kind of discount private investigator, my bare feet silent on the carpet that we'd all chipped in to replace last year during the building's community improvement phase. Funny how community improvement doesn't cover preventing your neighbors from screwing your wife, but I guess that's not really a maintenance issue, is it? The stairwell door was still swinging slightly when I reached it, which meant they hadn't gone far. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, listening for footsteps, voices, anything that would tell me which direction they'd gone. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from somewhere above me, followed by what sounded like muffled laughter. They were going up, to the 4th floor, which was interesting because as far as I knew, we didn't know anyone on the 4th floor. But then again, apparently there were a lot of things about my wife's social circle that I didn't know. I eased the door open and started climbing, keeping to the outer edge of each step because that's where they're less likely to creak. Don't ask me how I knew that. Probably too many episodes of Criminal Minds during those nights when Marissa claimed she was too tired for anything but sleep. The 4th floor hallway was identical to ours, except everything was flipped like a mirror image. Same beige walls, same industrial carpet, same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were dying of consumption. I could hear voices coming from apartment 4C, which was directly above our spare bedroom. How's that for cosmic irony? The guy my wife was cheating with lived right above us, probably listening to us argue about whose turn it was to take out the trash while planning his next romantic rendezvous with my supposedly devoted spouse. I pressed myself against the wall next to 4C, feeling like a character in some low-budget thriller where the budget was so tight they couldn't afford actual sets. The door was cheap hollow-core construction, the kind that lets you hear everything from a normal conversation to a sneeze to, apparently, the sound of your marriage dissolving in real time. I can't believe you live right above him, Marissa was saying, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. The same tone she used to use when we'd sneak away for weekend trips, back when she still pretended to find me exciting. Makes it more fun, doesn't it? This was Leo's voice, deep, confident, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Probably European. Women always go crazy for European guys, like having a different passport automatically makes you better in bed. God, yes. Sometimes I can hear him watching TV down there, and I just think about you up here, waiting for me. I wanted to vomit, or punch something, or both. Instead, I just stood there like a masochist, listening to my wife discuss how much she enjoyed the geographic convenience of cheating on me. Did you bring what I asked for? Leo's voice again, closer to the door now. Of course. I could practically hear her smiling. I brought what you like. The good stuff. The good stuff. My specially modified tube of Japanese lubricant, now featuring the kind of industrial adhesive that could probably hold a space shuttle together. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. There was some rustling, probably Marissa digging through her purse, followed by what sounded like someone opening a tube. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it through the wall. Perfect, Leo said. You know how much I love it when you come prepared. Oh, buddy, I thought, you have no idea how prepared she is tonight. I heard footsteps moving away from the door, deeper into the apartment. The voices became muffled, but I could still make out the general tone, playful, flirtatious, building toward what they thought was going to be another successful night of adultery. I pressed my ear harder against the door, straining to hear what was coming next. Part of me wanted to kick the door down and confront them right then and there, to see the look on their faces when they realized their little secret was out. But the other part of me, the part that had carefully replaced the contents of that tube, wanted to wait and see how this played out. The apartment went quiet for a few minutes, which probably meant they were getting down to business. I imagined Leo lying back on whatever cheap furniture he had in there, probably feeling pretty damn pleased with himself for landing a married woman who lived one floor down and brought her own supplies. Then I heard Marissa's voice. Just relax. This is going to be amazing. Famous last words, sweetheart. For about 30 seconds, there was nothing but the kind of sounds you'd expect from two people who thought they were about to have the time of their lives. Some movement, some heavy breathing. The general audio backdrop of two adults about to discover that karma has a really twisted sense of humor. Then everything changed. What the? Leo's voice, sharp and confused. Wait, something's wrong, Marissa said, and I could hear the first note of panic creeping in. What did you do? Leo again, his voice rising. What the hell did you put on me? I don't understand. Marissa sounded genuinely confused, which would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. It's the same stuff as always. The silver tube. The Japanese brand you like. Well, something's wrong with it. I can't. We can't. Oh God, we're stuck. And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. the sweet sound of two cheaters realizing that their night of passion had turned into a medical emergency. I pressed my face against the door, grinning like a psychopath, listening to their panic escalate. "Don't pull," Marissa hissed. "You're making it worse." "How can I not pull? We're literally glued together." "That's impossible. It's lubricant, not glue." "Oh, my sweet, stupid wife. If only you knew how wrong you were." The next few minutes were like listening to the world's most satisfying comedy show. They tried everything: water from the kitchen sink, soap from the bathroom, even what sounded like cooking oil. Nothing worked. The industrial-grade super glue was doing exactly what it was designed to do: create a permanent bond between two surfaces. In this case, those surfaces happened to be my cheating wife and her boyfriend. "We need to call someone," Leo said, his voice tight with pain and embarrassment. "Call who? What are we supposed to say?" "I don't know. A doctor? An ambulance?" "Oh God, this is humiliating. You ain't seen nothing yet, honey." After about 40 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to separate themselves, they finally admitted defeat. I heard Leo make the call. "Yes, we need an ambulance. It's hard to explain. We're kind of stuck together." I decided that was my cue to leave. After all, I didn't want to be standing in the hallway when the paramedics showed up. That would be awkward for everyone involved. But as I headed back toward the stairs, I couldn't help but smile. Phase 1 was complete. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor that's so twisted, so perfectly calibrated to deliver maximum irony, that you almost have to believe in some kind of cosmic justice. Because there I was, padding back down to my apartment in my bathrobe, listening to the muffled sounds of panic from 4C, feeling like I'd just witnessed the greatest act of divine intervention since Moses parted the Red Sea. I slipped back into my apartment and positioned myself in the hallway, right by our front door, where I had the perfect vantage point to watch the show. Our peephole gave me a fisheye view of the elevator and most of the hallway, which meant I was about to get front row seats to what was undoubtedly going to be the most entertaining medical emergency in the history of our building. The sounds from upstairs had escalated from whispered panic to full-blown crisis mode. I could hear Leo's voice through the ceiling now, getting louder and more desperate with each passing minute. "This isn't working. Nothing's working. Stop yelling," Marissa hissed back, but even her whisper was loud enough to carry through the thin walls. "The neighbors are going to hear." Oh, honey, the neighbors were definitely going to hear. And see. And probably record everything on their phones, because this was 2024 and nothing stayed private anymore. Especially not when it involved two naked people glued together like some kind of pornographic arts and crafts project. I heard footsteps in the hallway above, then the sound of Leo's door opening. "Yes, we called about an emergency." His voice was strained, talking to someone on his phone. "We're on the 4th floor, apartment 4C. And please be discreet." Discreet. Right. Because there's a discreet way to handle two adults who've managed to superglue themselves together during an extramarital affair. This was going to be about as discreet as a fireworks show in a library. About 10 minutes later, I heard the elevator ding, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps and equipment being wheeled down the hallway. The paramedics had arrived, and they were not traveling light. I could hear multiple voices now, all trying to maintain that professional medical calm that healthcare workers use when they're dealing with something completely ridiculous. "So, if I understand correctly," one of the paramedics was saying, his voice carrying easily through the cheap construction, "you two are attached?" "It was an accident," Leo said quickly. "Some kind of reaction with the product we were using." "Product? That's what we're calling it now. Not the lubricant I was using to cheat on my wife. Just product. Like they were testing out a new kind of shampoo and had an unexpected allergic reaction." "What kind of product?" the paramedic asked, and I could hear the barely suppressed amusement in his voice. These guys had probably seen everything, but this was definitely going to be a story they told at the bar for years to come. "Personal lubricant," Marissa said, her voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "It's a Japanese brand. We've used it before without any problems." "Ma'am, I need you to speak up. And I'm going to need to see the packaging if you still have it." There was some rustling, then Leo's voice. "Here it is. But I don't understand what went wrong. This has never happened before." I wished I could see the paramedic's face when he examined my handiwork. The tube looked completely normal from the outside. Same silver casing, same Japanese lettering, same professional packaging. It was only the contents that had been upgraded from love potion to permanent adhesive. Sir, I hate to break it to you, but this isn't lubricant anymore. This is industrial adhesive. Someone's replaced the contents. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they tried to process what they'd just been told. Someone had sabotaged their affair supplies. But who? And how? And why? That's impossible, Leo said finally. The tube was sealed. It came straight from Marissa's purse. Well, unless you two decided to experiment with construction materials tonight, someone definitely tampered with this. The question is, who had access to it? Oh, the delicious irony. They were literally stuck together, unable to move, while trying to figure out who could have possibly known about their little secret. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. We need to get you to the hospital, the paramedic continued. This kind of adhesive isn't going to come apart on its own, and we're going to need some specialized equipment to separate you safely. Can't you just, I don't know, use some kind of solvent? Marissa asked desperately. Ma'am, this stuff is designed to bond metal to concrete. It's not coming off with soap and water. We're going to need to be very careful here to avoid causing permanent damage. Permanent damage. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. I wondered if either of them was thinking about the metaphorical permanent damage they'd already caused, or if they were too focused on the literal permanent damage they might be facing. How are we going to get them downstairs? Another voice asked. They can't exactly walk to the elevator like this. We're going to have to use a stretcher and transport them together. It's going to be awkward. Awkward was putting it mildly. I was imagining the logistics of getting two grown adults who were stuck together in the most intimate possible way down 4 flights of stairs and into an ambulance. This was going to require some serious creative problem solving. I need both of you to try to stay as still as possible, the lead paramedic said. Any movement could make the situation worse. We're going to cover you with a sheet and get you onto a stretcher, then transport you to the emergency room. What about privacy? Leo asked. There are going to be people in the hallway, neighbors with cameras. Sir, I understand your concern, but right now our priority is getting you medical attention. Privacy is, well, it's going to be challenging under the circumstances. I heard more movement upstairs, the sound of equipment being positioned, and the general bustle of medical professionals trying to figure out how to handle a situation that definitely hadn't been covered in their training manual. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The sound of Leo's apartment door opening, followed by multiple sets of footsteps in the hallway above. They were bringing them out. I positioned myself at my peephole, ready for the show of a lifetime. This was better than pay-per-view, better than any reality TV show, better than Christmas morning. This was justice, served cold, and with a side of public humiliation. The elevator dinged, and I heard the mechanical whir of the stretcher being wheeled out. Through my peephole, I could see the paramedics maneuvering something large and sheet-covered toward the elevator. The sheet wasn't quite big enough to cover everything, and I caught a glimpse of 2 sets of legs at very odd angles. Behind them came a small crowd of neighbors who'd been drawn out by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from 3B had her phone out, naturally. The college kids from 2A were trying to look nonchalant while obviously recording everything. Even cranky Mr. Henderson from the first floor had emerged from his cave to see what all the fuss was about. The elevator doors closed, and the building fell silent except for the excited chatter of neighbors discussing what they'd just witnessed. I waited another few minutes, then cracked my door open and stepped into the hallway. Crazy night, huh? Mrs. Patterson said, still clutching her phone. Did you see what happened? I shook my head, putting on my best confused neighbor expression. I heard the sirens, but I was asleep. What's going on? 2 people got stuck together somehow, she said, her eyes bright with gossip. Had to take them both to the hospital on the same stretcher. Stuck together how? Well, she leaned in conspiratorially. From what I heard, they were, intimate, and something went wrong with some kind of product they were using. I made appropriate shocked noises and headed back inside, where I poured myself a very large, very well-deserved glass of scotch. Phase 2 was complete. You know what they say about the walk of shame? Well, apparently when you've been surgically separated from your affair partner after being superglued together like some kind of perverted science experiment, it's less of a walk and more of a shuffle. A very careful, very painful shuffle that makes you look like you've been hit by a truck driven by Karma herself. I was sitting at our kitchen table the next morning, sipping my coffee and reading the news on my tablet like any normal husband whose wife hadn't spent the night glued to another man's anatomy, when I heard the key in the lock. It was around 10:30 a.m., which meant they'd been at the hospital for roughly 9 hours. 9 hours of what I could only imagine was the most humiliating medical experience in the history of emergency medicine. The door opened slowly, like whoever was on the other side was afraid of what they might find. Or maybe they were just moving carefully because every step probably felt like walking on broken glass. Either way, it was Marissa who appeared first, and Jesus Christ, she looked like she'd been through a blender. Her hair was a disaster. That perfectly styled look from last night had been replaced by something that screamed, "I've been in a hospital bed for 9 hours trying to explain to medical professionals why I'm attached to a man who isn't my husband." Her makeup was completely gone, leaving her face pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes that made her look like she'd aged about 10 years overnight. But it was the way she was moving that really sold the whole "I've made some very poor life choices" aesthetic. She was shuffling like each step was agony, her legs slightly apart in a way that suggested sitting down was going to be an adventure for the foreseeable future. Her dress, that sexy black number she'd put on to seduce Leo, was wrinkled and stained with what looked like hospital-grade antiseptic. "Morning, honey," I said, not looking up from my tablet. "How was your night? You came in pretty late." She froze in the doorway like a deer caught in headlights, probably trying to remember whatever bullshit story she'd prepared during the ambulance ride. There was an emergency at work. A client crisis. I had to stay late to handle it. An emergency. A client crisis. Well, she wasn't wrong. There had definitely been an emergency, and it had definitely created a crisis. Just not the kind she was implying. "That sucks," I said, finally looking up with my best concerned husband expression. "You look exhausted. And is that? Are you walking funny? Did you hurt yourself?" The look on her face was priceless. Here she was, trying to maintain the illusion that she'd spent the night dealing with spreadsheets and conference calls, while simultaneously trying to explain why she looked like she'd been in a medieval torture device. I fell. At the office. Down some stairs. Twisted my back. Fell down some stairs. Right. That was definitely one way to describe being surgically separated from your lover after a superglue incident. I had to admire her creativity, even if her execution was lacking. "Oh no. Did you go to the hospital? You should probably get that checked out." "I did," she said quickly. I went to urgent care. They said it was just a strain. Gave me some medication for the pain." She was limping toward the bedroom now, probably desperate to get out of that dress and into something that didn't smell like medical disinfectant and poor decisions. But before she could escape, there was another knock at the door. I got up to answer it, even though I had a pretty good idea who it was going to be. Sure enough, there was Leo, looking like he'd gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer who specialized in hitting people in the crotch. He was tall, I'll give him that. Probably 6'2", with the kind of lean muscle that comes from regular gym sessions, and a metabolism that hasn't been destroyed by 15 years of marriage and stress eating. His hair was dark and messy in that carefully casual way that takes about an hour to achieve, and under normal circumstances, he probably would have been what most women would call handsome. These were not normal circumstances. His jeans were unbuttoned at the top, hanging loose around his waist like he couldn't bear to have anything touching his skin down there. He was moving with the same careful shuffle as Marissa, and his face had that grayish pallor that comes from spending all night in fluorescent lighting while medical professionals discuss your genitals in clinical terms. Hi," he said, his voice hoarse. "Is Marissa here? We need to talk about what happened last night." What happened last night? Like it was some kind of natural disaster that had befallen them, rather than the predictable result of adultery meeting industrial adhesive. "Sure, come on in," I said, stepping aside with a friendly smile. Marissa just got back from work. She had some kind of emergency that kept her out all night. Leo's eyes widened slightly, and I saw him glance toward the bedroom where Marissa had disappeared. He was probably wondering if she'd already spun some elaborate cover story, and if so, what version he was supposed to stick to. "Right," he said slowly. "The work emergency. You know how it is," I continued, closing the door behind him. "Crisis management, damage control, trying to fix things that have gone completely wrong. Sometimes these situations require very delicate handling." I was laying it on thick, but I couldn't help myself. The guy was standing in my living room, probably still feeling the effects of whatever industrial solvent they'd used to separate him from my wife. And he had no idea that I knew exactly what kind of emergency had kept them both busy all night. Marissa emerged from the bedroom wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, the kind of outfit that screamed, "I am not okay, and I don't want anything touching my body right now." When she saw Leo standing in our living room, her face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. "Leo," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here? We need to discuss the situation from last night." They were both speaking in code, trying to have a conversation about their medical emergency without actually saying anything that might tip me off. It was like watching two people try to discuss a bank robbery using only words you'd find in a children's book. "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested helpfully. "You both look like you're in pain." The look they exchanged was pure panic. Sitting down was obviously not on the agenda for either of them, which meant the hospital visit had been even more traumatic than I'd imagined. "Actually, I think I need to lie down," Marissa said quickly. "The pain medication is making me dizzy. And I should probably get going," Leo added. "I just wanted to make sure you were." "Okay. Of course she's okay," I said, putting my arm around Marissa's shoulders. She winced when I touched her, but tried to play it off as fatigue. "My wife is tough. She can handle anything life throws at her." Leo nodded awkwardly and headed for the door, moving like a cowboy who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. I'll call you later." "About the project." "Sure," Marissa said weakly. "The project." After he left, Marissa collapsed onto the couch with a groan that she tried to disguise as a yawn. "I think I'm coming down with something," she said. "Maybe you should sleep in the guest room tonight. I don't want you to catch whatever I have." Oh, I was pretty sure what she had wasn't contagious. Unless stupidity and adultery were communicable diseases, which, come to think of it, might explain a lot about human behavior. "Of course, honey," I said, bringing her a glass of water. "You just rest. I'll take care of everything." And I would. Starting with planning phase 3. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've always been more of a serve it blazing hot with a side of public humiliation kind of guy. Besides, when your cheating wife is already walking like she's been kicked by a mule, why not add a little spice to her recovery process? I spent the rest of that afternoon playing the role of devoted husband with the kind of Oscar-worthy performance that would have made Meryl Streep weep with envy. I brought Marissa pillows, adjusted the thermostat, asked if she needed anything every 20 minutes, and generally behaved like a man whose biggest concern was his wife's mysterious, work-related injury. She was milking it for all it was worth, of course. Every movement was accompanied by a wince. Every position change required a dramatic intake of breath, and she developed this pathetic little whimper that she deployed whenever she thought I wasn't looking directly at her. It was like watching a one-woman production of The Suffering Wife, performed by someone who'd never actually experienced real suffering, but had watched a lot of soap operas. "I think I need to eat something," she said around 4 p.m., speaking from her position on the couch, where she'd been arranged like some kind of wounded princess. "But my stomach is really sensitive right now. Maybe something light." Oh, her stomach was sensitive? How interesting. I wondered if that had anything to do with the stress of spending 9 hours in a hospital explaining to medical professionals why she was anatomically connected to a man who wasn't her husband, or if it was just a side effect of whatever painkillers they'd given her. "Of course, baby," I said, already heading toward the kitchen. "I'll make something special. You just rest." Something special indeed. I'd been planning this meal since she'd shuffled through our front door, looking like a walking advertisement for the consequences of adultery. It was going to be a symphony of spice, a carefully orchestrated assault on her already compromised digestive system. I started with lamb skewers, but these weren't your garden variety barbecue fare. I marinated the meat in a blend that would have made a jalapeno pepper file a restraining order. Ghost pepper powder, Carolina Reaper flakes, habanero sauce, and enough cayenne to strip paint. Then I added some Thai bird's eye chilies for texture and a generous helping of wasabi paste, because why the hell not? While the lamb was absorbing its payload of thermal warfare, I moved on to the garlic prawns. Now, I love garlic as much as the next guy, but this was garlic with a purpose. I used about 10 cloves where a normal recipe would call for 2, then added garlic powder, garlic salt, and some black garlic I'd been saving for a special occasion. The prawns were swimming in enough garlic to ward off every vampire in a 5-state radius. But the piece de resistance was the chili crab. I'd ordered it from that Singaporean place downtown, the one that advertises their authentic volcanic heat and makes you sign a waiver before they'll serve you their spiciest dishes. This wasn't just food. This was a weaponized dining experience that came with its own fire extinguisher. "Smells amazing in there," Marissa called from the living room, her voice still carrying that pathetic, wounded quality. "What are you making?" "Just some of your favorites," I called back, grinning as I arranged everything on a platter that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. "I know you've been stressed lately, so I wanted to do something special." "Stressed?" "Right. Nothing quite like being surgically separated from your lover to really ramp up those stress levels." I brought the feast out on a tray, complete with cloth napkins and our good silverware. The presentation was beautiful, restaurant-quality plating that disguised the fact that I'd essentially created a meal designed to torture someone with compromised internal geography. "Oh wow," Marissa said, struggling to sit up straighter on the couch. "This looks incredible. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all," I assured her, settling the tray on the coffee table within easy reach. "I know how much you love spicy food, and after the night you've had, I figured you could use some comfort food." That was the beauty of my plan. Marissa did love spicy food. Under normal circumstances, she could handle heat that would send most people running for milk. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they? Her entire digestive system was probably already in revolt from stress, painkillers, and whatever hospital food they'd forced on her during her extended stay in medical hell. She took her first bite of the lamb, and I watched her face like a hawk studying a field mouse. For a split second, her expression was pure appreciation. The meat was perfectly cooked, the flavors were complex and well-balanced, and under any other circumstances, it would have been a genuinely excellent meal. Then the heat hit. It started as a slight widening of her eyes, followed by a pause in her chewing, then a very careful swallow that suggested she was already regretting her life choices. But she was committed now, trapped by the need to maintain her everything is fine facade. "This is really good," she said, reaching for her water glass with movements that were just a little too quick to be casual. "Very flavorful." Flavorful. That was one way to put it. She gamely worked her way through the prawns, each bite requiring more water and longer pauses. The garlic was doing its job. I could see beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the fact that our apartment was kept at a comfortable 72 degrees. But it was the chili crab that really sealed the deal. She took one bite, and I watched her entire body tense like she'd been hit with a cattle prod. Her face went red, then white, then an interesting shade of green that I'd never seen on a human being before. "I need," she started, then stopped, probably because speaking required breathing, and breathing was currently not her friend. "More water?" I asked helpfully, already refilling her glass. "The crab is pretty intense. I probably should have warned you." She nodded desperately, downing the entire glass in 3 gulps. But the damage was done. I could practically see the heat working its way through her system, adding insult to injury in places that were already tender from her medical adventure. "Maybe I should lie down," she said weakly. "I think the medication is interacting with the food." "Of course," I said, all concern and sympathy. "You should probably get some rest. I'll clean up here." She struggled to her feet, moving even more carefully than before, and shuffled toward the bedroom like a woman walking through a minefield. Every step looked like agony, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. As she disappeared down the hallway, I heard my phone buzz with a text message. It was from my buddy Rick, who worked at the hospital. "Dude, you're not going to believe the case that came into the ER last night. 2 people glued together during sex. Had to bring in a specialist to separate them. Funniest shit I've ever seen." I typed back, "No way. That's crazy. Are they okay?" "Physically, they'll be fine eventually. But the guy developed an infection at the separation site. Had to admit him for 4 antibiotics. The woman went home, but she's going to be uncomfortable for a while. An infection. Leo's situation had gotten worse, which meant phase 3 was going to be even more effective than I'd planned. I finished cleaning up the kitchen, then prepared my next surprise. Hidden in our medicine cabinet, behind the aspirin and Band-Aids, was a tube of recovery ointment that Marissa would probably need for the next few days. It was a perfectly innocent-looking product designed to soothe irritated skin and promote healing. It was also about to be replaced with something that would turn her recovery process into a whole new level of hell. I unscrewed the cap and emptied the contents into the sink, then refilled the tube with capsaicin cream, the stuff they use to treat arthritis pain, the same active ingredient that makes pepper spray so effective. It looked identical to the original ointment, same color, same consistency. But when Marissa applied it to her tender areas tomorrow morning, she was going to discover that some mistakes have consequences that just keep on giving. I put the tube back exactly where I'd found it and headed to bed. Phase 3 was locked and loaded. You know that moment in horror movies when the victim finally realizes they're not dealing with a random accident, but with someone who's been planning their demise all along? Well, I got to witness that exact moment in real time, and let me tell you, it was more satisfying than a perfectly aged scotch on a cold winter night. It started around 6 a.m. with a scream that could have woken the dead. Not just any scream. This was the kind of primal, gut-wrenching shriek that comes from someone who's just discovered that their day is about to go from bad to please kill me now. It came from our bathroom, followed immediately by what sounded like someone trying to put out a fire with their bare hands. I was already awake, of course. Had been for about an hour, lying in our guest bed listening for the exact moment when Marissa would apply what she thought was soothing recovery ointment to her already traumatized anatomy. The anticipation had been killing me, like waiting for the finale of the world's most twisted reality show. "Jesus Christ," she screamed, and I heard something crash in the bathroom. Probably the tube of ointment hitting the tile floor as she realized that what was supposed to heal her was instead setting her on fire from the inside out. I gave it exactly 10 seconds, long enough for the capsaicin to really get to work, but not so long that she'd start to suspect I wasn't coming to help. Before I jumped out of bed and ran toward the bathroom like the concerned husband I was pretending to be. "Marissa? What's wrong?" I called through the door, which was locked. Smart woman. She'd developed trust issues about people seeing her in vulnerable positions. Wonder why that might be. "Something's wrong with the medicine," she gasped between what sounded like hyperventilating. "It's burning. Oh God, it's burning." "What medicine? The ointment from the hospital?" "Yes." "No. I don't know. Make it stop." I could hear water running, which meant she was probably trying to rinse off the cream. Unfortunately for her, capsaicin is oil-based, which means water just spreads it around. It's like trying to put out a grease fire with a garden hose. You're just making the problem worse. "Honey, open the door. Let me help you." The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal a scene that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so perfectly orchestrated. Marissa was bent over the sink, splashing water on herself with the desperation of someone trying to escape hell. Her face was red and streaked with tears, her hair was soaked, and she was making these little whimpering sounds that would have tugged at my heartstrings if I still had any where she was concerned. "I can't make it stop," she sobbed. "The burning won't stop. Something's wrong with that tube." I looked at the fallen tube on the floor, my handiwork scattered across the bathroom tiles. "That's weird," I said, picking it up and examining it like I'd never seen it before. "This is the same brand you always use, isn't it?" "I don't know. Maybe they changed the formula? Maybe it's expired? I don't care what it is. Just make it stop." The beauty of capsaicin is that it doesn't just burn. It creates this deep, penetrating heat that feels like it's coming from inside your bones. And once it gets on sensitive tissue, especially tissue that's already been traumatized by, say, emergency medical separation procedures, it turns into the kind of pain that makes you question every decision you've ever made. "We need to get you to the hospital," I said, wrapping a towel around her shaking shoulders. "This isn't normal. You might be having some kind of allergic reaction." "I can't go back there," she whispered. "Not again. Not after last night." Ah, there it was. The admission that last night had been something more than a work emergency. She was so focused on the burning sensation between her legs that she'd let her guard down and revealed that she had reasons to avoid the hospital beyond simple embarrassment. "Honey, this is serious. You're in real pain, and I'm worried about infection or complications from your fall yesterday." Her fall, right. We were still maintaining that fiction, even though she was currently experiencing what felt like napalm being applied to her most intimate areas. "I can't," she said again, but I could see the resolve cracking. The pain was winning the battle against her pride, which was exactly what I'd been counting on. "Look at me," I said, taking her face in my hands with all the tenderness of a devoted husband. "I love you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. But this isn't something we can handle at home." The drive to the hospital was a symphony of suffering. Marissa couldn't sit properly in the passenger seat. She was half lying, half crouching, trying to find a position that didn't make the burning worse. Every bump in the road sent her into fresh waves of agony, and she was gripping the door handle so hard I thought she might rip it off. "How did this happen?" she kept asking. "How did this happen?" If only she knew the answer to that question. If only she understood that every moment of pain she was experiencing was a direct result of choices she'd made, lies she'd told, and trust she'd broken. But that level of self-awareness was probably beyond her capabilities right now. We pulled up to the emergency room entrance, the same one she'd been wheeled out of less than 12 hours earlier, still attached to her lover like some kind of pornographic Siamese twin. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I had to suppress a smile as I helped her out of the car. The triage nurse took one look at Marissa's condition and immediately escalated her to a private room. Being a repeat customer definitely had its advantages, especially when your previous visit involved being surgically separated from someone who wasn't your spouse. Dr. Martinez, the same physician who'd overseen the separation procedure, walked in with an expression that suggested he was either having the strangest week of his medical career or he'd entered some kind of alternate universe where people's sex lives had declared war on basic anatomy. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, consulting his chart. "Back so soon. What seems to be the problem?" Marissa tried to explain about the ointment, the burning, the reaction she was having. Dr. Martinez listened with the kind of professional patience that comes from years of dealing with medical mysteries. But I could see the concern growing in his eyes as he examined her. "This level of inflammation is severe," he said finally. "The tissue damage from yesterday's procedure, combined with what appears to be a chemical burn, has created a potentially serious situation." Chemical burn. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Are you certain about the ointment you used?" he asked. "Because this reaction is consistent with exposure to capsaicin or a similar irritant." Marissa looked confused, which was understandable since she had no idea that her loving husband had been conducting chemistry experiments with her recovery supplies. "I used the same tube I always use," she said weakly. "But something was wrong with it." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Given the extent of the damage and the risk of infection, I'm going to recommend surgical intervention. We need to remove the affected tissue before necrosis sets in." Necrosis. That was a word that commanded attention. It meant tissue death, permanent damage, the kind of consequences that don't just heal with time and good intentions. "Surgery." Marissa's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm afraid so. The combination of yesterday's trauma and today's chemical exposure has created a situation where conservative treatment isn't going to be sufficient. We need to excise the damaged tissue and give you the best chance for proper healing." I squeezed her hand supportively. "Whatever you think is best, doctor. We just want her to be okay." The consent forms were brought in, and I watched Marissa sign away pieces of herself with trembling hands. She was crying now, not just from the physical pain, but from the dawning realization that her body was going to be permanently changed by the events of the last 24 hours. "How long will the recovery take?" I asked, playing the concerned husband to perfection. "Several weeks at minimum," Dr. Martinez replied. "And there will be permanent changes. Some sensation may never return to normal." Permanent changes. Some sensation may never return to normal. I filed those phrases away for future reference, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the sterile hospital environment and everything to do with justice finally being served. As they wheeled Marissa toward the operating room, she grabbed my hand one last time. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with sedation and fear. "I love you too," I replied, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. I loved this version of her, vulnerable, consequences facing, finally paying the price for her betrayals. The surgery took 3 hours, and when Dr. Martinez came out to speak with me, his expression was grave. "We were able to remove all the damaged tissue," he said. "But the extent of the excision was more significant than we initially anticipated. She's going to need extensive follow-up care, and there will be permanent functional changes." I nodded solemnly, like a devoted husband receiving devastating news about his beloved wife. Inside, I was already planning phase 4. There's something deeply poetic about serving divorce papers to your cheating wife while she's lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an 4 drip and recovering from surgery that removed pieces of her body as a direct result of her own infidelity. It's like the universe finally decided to get involved in writing the perfect ending to a really fucked up love story. I'd spent the morning at my lawyer's office, finalizing documents that had been prepared with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. Every clause, every stipulation, every legal maneuver designed to ensure that Marissa walked away from our marriage with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. She'd get to keep the medical bills. The papers were tucked neatly into a manila folder as I walked through the hospital corridors, past the rooms full of people dealing with actual accidents and legitimate medical emergencies. Unlike my wife, who was currently experiencing the long-term consequences of poor decision-making and industrial-grade adhesive, Room 347 was private, which I'd specifically requested and paid for out of pocket. Call it a gesture of kindness. I wanted Marissa to have privacy for what was about to be the worst conversation of her life. The kind of privacy you need when your entire world collapses and you want to scream without disturbing the other patients. She was awake when I walked in, propped up on pillows and looking like she'd aged about 15 years in the past 2 days. The surgery had gone well, according to Dr. Martinez, but recovery was going to be a long and uncomfortable process. Permanently uncomfortable, in some ways. "Hey," she said weakly, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was wondering when you'd get here." The nurses said visiting hours started at 10. Traffic was a nightmare. I lied smoothly, settling into the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Then the truck backed up and hit me again. She shifted slightly and winced. "The doctor says I'll be here for another day or 2, then several weeks of recovery at home." Several weeks of recovery. That was optimistic. From what Dr. Martinez had told me privately, her recovery was going to involve a lot more than just taking it easy for a few weeks. We were talking about permanent changes to her anatomy, ongoing medical appointments, and the kind of complications that would serve as a daily reminder of her choices. "About that," I said, pulling the manila folder from my briefcase. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have triggered her survival instincts, because her expression shifted from drug-addled confusion to sharp alertness in about 2 seconds. She was suddenly very awake, very focused, and very aware that this conversation wasn't going to be about get-well-soon flowers and chicken soup. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the folder like it might contain a bomb. "Divorce papers," I said, placing them on the rolling table beside her bed with the casual air of someone delivering a pizza. "I need you to sign them." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the 4 drip counting down the seconds. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, each one marking another moment in which Marissa's brain tried to process what I'd just said. "What?" she finally whispered, and I have to say, her timing was perfect. The word came out just as a particularly strong dose of whatever painkiller they had her on hit her system, giving her voice this ethereal, disbelieving quality. "Divorce papers," I repeated, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table like I was dealing cards. "Pretty straightforward stuff. You keep nothing. I get the house, the cars, the savings, the investments. Our son stays with me full-time." She stared at the papers like they were written in ancient Sanskrit. "I don't understand." Why now?" "I'm in the hospital. I just had surgery." "Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?" I settled back in the chair, crossing my legs like we were discussing weekend plans instead of the complete destruction of her life. "See, I know about Leo. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel rooms, the messages, the silver tube of Japanese lubricant that you've been using to enhance your extracurricular activities." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might pass out. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, if fish could experience existential terror. "I know you've been drugging me, so you could sneak out for your little rendezvous. I know about the encrypted messaging app hidden in your groceries folder. I know about Leo living right upstairs in 4C. And I know that last night's medical emergency wasn't exactly the work-related accident you claimed it was." Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. I could actually see her deflating, like someone was slowly letting the air out of her entire existence. How? She managed to croak. Does it matter? The point is, I know. And now you're going to sign these papers, take responsibility for your choices, and get the hell out of my life. She tried to sit up straighter, which was a mistake given her current medical situation. The movement sent a wave of pain across her face that was almost worth the price of admission. You can't do this, she said, and there was a note of desperation creeping into her voice. Not like this. Not while I'm hurt and vulnerable. Hurt and vulnerable. I laughed, and it came out darker than I'd intended. That's rich. You were perfectly capable of making decisions when you were sneaking around behind my back. You were perfectly capable of planning hotel meetings and applying lubricant to other men. But now that there are consequences, suddenly you're too hurt and vulnerable to face them. It wasn't. It didn't mean anything, she said, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Leo means nothing to me. It was just physical. It was a mistake. A mistake. I let the word hang in the air between us. You know what a mistake is, Marissa? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is double booking a dinner reservation. What you did was make a series of deliberate choices over a period of months, each one designed to betray the trust of the man who loved you. The tears were flowing freely now, and she was making those little hiccuping sounds that people make when they're trying to cry quietly. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sorry for her. But these weren't different circumstances. Please, she whispered. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Would you undo the affair? Would you give me back the nights I spent alone while you were with him? Would you take back the lies, the deception, the complete destruction of everything we built together? She opened her mouth to answer, but I held up a hand to stop her. Because if you can't do any of that, and we both know you can't, then there's nothing to work through. There's just cleanup. I stood up and moved the papers closer to her bed. Sign them, Marissa. Accept that this is over, and try to maintain some dignity in how it ends. She stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been hope. What about our son? You can't keep him from his mother. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I've got video of you and Leo being wheeled out of the building on the same stretcher. I've got screenshots of your message history. I've got documentation of your drug use. Oh yes, I had that milk tested. Ambien, in case you're wondering. Her face went white again, but this time it was tinged with something that looked like genuine fear. Any custody battle is going to involve a lot of uncomfortable questions about your judgment, your lifestyle choices, and your fitness as a parent. Are you really sure you want to go down that road? She grabbed the papers with shaking hands and tore them in half. I'm not signing anything, she said, and for a moment there was a flash of the old Marissa, defiant, stubborn, convinced she could fight her way out of any situation. You want a divorce? Fine, but I'm not going to just roll over and let you take everything. I smiled and pulled another set of papers from my briefcase. I was hoping you'd say that. What's that? Plan B. See, if you won't sign the generous settlement I'm offering, we go to court. And in court, all of this becomes public record. The affair, the circumstances of your medical emergency, the drug use, everything. Is that really what you want? She stared at the second set of papers, and I could see the exact moment when she realized she was completely fucked. There was no way out. No clever legal maneuver, no last-minute rescue. Just the cold, hard reality of consequences finally catching up to choices. But instead of accepting defeat gracefully, she did something I didn't expect. She started to laugh. Not happy laughter, the kind of broken, hysterical laughter that people make when their sanity finally gives up and goes home. It started as a giggle, then built into full-blown cackles that echoed off the hospital room walls. You think you've won, she said between gasps. You think you're so smart, so clever. But you have no idea what you've done. Enlighten me. Leo isn't going anywhere. Even if we get divorced, even if you take everything, he'll still be there. And there are others, too. Do you really think he was the first? Do you really think this was some kind of isolated incident? The words hit me like a slap across the face, but I kept my expression neutral. Others? Oh, honey, she said, and her voice was pure poison now. You have no idea how long this has been going on. Leo was just the most recent, the most convenient. But there have been others. Lots of others. And there it was. The final revelation that turned my carefully planned revenge from a surgical strike into something much more comprehensive. I looked at my broken, hospitalized, soon-to-be ex-wife and realized that phase 4 was going to be much more extensive than I'd originally planned. There's something deeply poetic about serving divorce papers to your cheating wife while she's lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an 4 drip and recovering from surgery that removed pieces of her body as a direct result of her own infidelity. It's like the universe finally decided to get involved in writing the perfect ending to a really fucked up love story. I'd spent the morning at my lawyer's office, finalizing documents that had been prepared with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. Every clause, every stipulation, every legal maneuver designed to ensure that Marissa walked away from our marriage with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. She'd get to keep the medical bills. The papers were tucked neatly into a manila folder as I walked through the hospital corridors, past the rooms full of people dealing with actual accidents and legitimate medical emergencies. Unlike my wife, who was currently experiencing the long-term consequences of poor decision-making and industrial-grade adhesive. Room 347 was private, which I'd specifically requested and paid for out of pocket. Call it a gesture of kindness. I wanted Marissa to have privacy for what was about to be the worst conversation of her life. The kind of privacy you need when your entire world collapses and you want to scream without disturbing the other patients. She was awake when I walked in, propped up on pillows and looking like she'd aged about 15 years in the past 2 days. The surgery had gone well, according to Dr. Martinez, but recovery was going to be a long and uncomfortable process. Permanently uncomfortable in some ways. "Hey," she said weakly, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was wondering when you'd get here. The nurses said visiting hours started at 10. Traffic was a nightmare." I lied smoothly, settling into the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Then the truck backed up and hit me again. She shifted slightly and winced. "The doctor says I'll be here for another day or two, then several weeks of recovery at home." Several weeks of recovery. That was optimistic. From what Dr. Martinez had told me privately, her recovery was going to involve a lot more than just taking it easy for a few weeks. We were talking about permanent changes to her anatomy, ongoing medical appointments, and the kind of complications that would serve as a daily reminder of her choices. "About that," I said, pulling the manila folder from my briefcase. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have triggered her survival instincts, because her expression shifted from drug-addled confusion to sharp alertness in about 2 seconds. She was suddenly very awake, very focused, and very aware that this conversation wasn't going to be about get-well-soon flowers and chicken soup. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the folder like it might contain a bomb. "Divorce papers," I said, placing them on the rolling table beside her bed with the casual air of someone delivering a pizza. "I need you to sign them." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the 4 drip counting down the seconds. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, each one marking another moment in which Marissa's brain tried to process what I'd just said. "What?" she finally whispered, and I have to say, her timing was perfect. The word came out just as a particularly strong dose of whatever painkiller they had her on hit her system, giving her voice this ethereal, disbelieving quality. "Divorce papers," I repeated, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table like I was dealing cards. "Pretty straightforward stuff. You keep nothing. I get the house, the cars, the savings, the investments. Our son stays with me full-time." She stared at the papers like they were written in ancient Sanskrit. "I don't understand." Why now?" "I'm in the hospital. I just had surgery." "Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?" I settled back in the chair, crossing my legs like we were discussing weekend plans instead of the complete destruction of her life. "See, I know about Leo. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel rooms, the messages, the silver tube of Japanese lubricant that you've been using to enhance your extracurricular activities." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might pass out. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, if fish could experience existential terror. "I know you've been drugging me, so you could sneak out for your little rendezvous. I know about the encrypted messaging app hidden in your groceries folder. I know about Leo living right upstairs in 4C. And I know that last night's medical emergency wasn't exactly the work-related accident you claimed it was. Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. I could actually see her deflating, like someone was slowly letting the air out of her entire existence. How? She managed to croak. Does it matter? The point is, I know. And now you're going to sign these papers, take responsibility for your choices, and get the hell out of my life. She tried to sit up straighter, which was a mistake given her current medical situation. The movement sent a wave of pain across her face that was almost worth the price of admission. You can't do this, she said, and there was a note of desperation creeping into her voice. Not like this. Not while I'm hurt and vulnerable. Hurt and vulnerable. I laughed, and it came out darker than I'd intended. That's rich. You were perfectly capable of making decisions when you were sneaking around behind my back. You were perfectly capable of planning hotel meetings and applying lubricant to other men. But now that there are consequences, suddenly you're too hurt and vulnerable to face them. It wasn't. It didn't mean anything, she said, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Leo means nothing to me. It was just physical. It was a mistake. A mistake. I let the word hang in the air between us. You know what a mistake is, Marissa? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is double booking a dinner reservation. What you did was make a series of deliberate choices over a period of months, each one designed to betray the trust of the man who loved you. The tears were flowing freely now, and she was making those little hiccuping sounds that people make when they're trying to cry quietly. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sorry for her. But these weren't different circumstances. Please, she whispered. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Would you undo the affair? Would you give me back the nights I spent alone while you were with him? Would you take back the lies, the deception, the complete destruction of everything we built together? She opened her mouth to answer, but I held up a hand to stop her. Because if you can't do any of that, and we both know you can't, then there's nothing to work through. There's just cleanup. I stood up and moved the papers closer to her bed. Sign them, Marissa. Accept that this is over, and try to maintain some dignity in how it ends. She stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been hope. What about our son? You can't keep him from his mother. Watch me. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I've got video of you and Leo being wheeled out of the building on the same stretcher. I've got screenshots of your message history. I've got documentation of your drug use. Oh yes, I had that milk tested. Ambien, in case you're wondering. Her face went white again, but this time it was tinged with something that looked like genuine fear. Any custody battle is going to involve a lot of uncomfortable questions about your judgment, your lifestyle choices, and your fitness as a parent. Are you really sure you want to go down that road? She grabbed the papers with shaking hands and tore them in half. I'm not signing anything, she said, and for a moment there was a flash of the old Marissa, defiant, stubborn, convinced she could fight her way out of any situation. You want a divorce? Fine, but I'm not going to just roll over and let you take everything. I smiled and pulled another set of papers from my briefcase. I was hoping you'd say that. What's that? Plan B. See, if you won't sign the generous settlement I'm offering, we go to court. And in court, all of this becomes public record. The affair, the circumstances of your medical emergency, the drug use, everything. Is that really what you want? She stared at the second set of papers, and I could see the exact moment when she realized she was completely fucked. There was no way out, no clever legal maneuver, no last-minute rescue. Just the cold, hard reality of consequences finally catching up to choices. But instead of accepting defeat gracefully, she did something I didn't expect. She started to laugh. Not happy laughter, the kind of broken, hysterical laughter that people make when their sanity finally gives up and goes home. It started as a giggle, then built into full-blown cackles that echoed off the hospital room walls. You think you've won, she said between gasps. You think you're so smart, so clever. But you have no idea what you've done. Enlighten me. Leo isn't going anywhere. Even if we get divorced, even if you take everything, he'll still be there. And there are others, too. Do you really think he was the first? Do you really think this was some kind of isolated incident? The words hit me like a slap across the face, but I kept my expression neutral. Others. "Oh, honey," she said, and her voice was pure poison now. "You have no idea how long this has been going on. Leo was just the most recent. The most convenient. But there have been others. Lots of others." And there it was. The final revelation that turned my carefully planned revenge from a surgical strike into something much more comprehensive. I looked at my broken, hospitalized, soon-to-be ex-wife and realized that phase 4 was going to be much more extensive than I'd originally planned. You know what they say about the internet never forgetting? Well, turns out that's especially true when your cheating wife and her lover get carted off to the hospital in the most humiliating position imaginable, and half your building has smartphones with HD video capability. Mrs. Patterson from 3B had really outdone herself. The woman who usually spent her time recording her cats doing mundane shit had somehow managed to capture the entire ambulance scene in glorious 4K detail. The video was a masterpiece of accidental cinematography. It had everything from the initial confusion of the paramedics to the moment when they realized they needed a bigger stretcher, all the way through to the final shot of Leo and Marissa being wheeled out like some kind of pornographic sculpture. The best part? You could clearly see both their faces. I'd gotten a copy from Mrs. Patterson under the pretense of wanting to make sure Marissa was okay, which she bought because I'd perfected the concerned husband act over the past few days. What she didn't know was that I had much bigger plans for her amateur filmmaking than just checking on my wife's well-being. Within 6 hours of getting the video, I'd created accounts on every major social media platform. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. The whole digital ecosystem where shame goes to multiply like bacteria in a petri dish. The video was uploaded with carefully crafted captions that told just enough of the story to make it go viral without actually getting me sued for defamation. "When cheating goes horribly wrong" was the caption that really took off. Simple, direct, and guaranteed to make people hit the share button faster than you could say karma's a bitch. The internet, as it turns out, has an endless appetite for watching other people's lives implode in spectacular fashion. Within 12 hours, the video had been viewed over 500,000 times. By day 2, it was trending on 3 different platforms. By day 3, it had spawned reaction videos, compilation clips, and even a few remix versions set to popular songs. But the real magic happened when people started recognizing them. "Holy shit, that's Leo from Flex Fitness," was one of the first comments that got my attention. Apparently, Leo was some kind of Instagram fitness influencer with a decent following who marketed himself as a relationship coach and lifestyle guru. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Within hours, someone had doxed him completely. His full name, his gym, his Instagram account, his business website, everything laid bare for the internet to examine and judge. And judge they did. His gym fired him before the week was out. Apparently, being internet famous for getting glued to a married woman during an affair wasn't the kind of publicity they were looking for. His Instagram account got flooded with comments ranging from helpful suggestions about better lubricant choices to detailed descriptions of what people thought should happen to cheaters. But Leo's public execution was nothing compared to what happened to Marissa. Someone recognized her from the parent-teacher conferences at our son's school. Another person knew her from her book club. A third identified her from the local yoga studio where she'd been a regular for years. Once her identity was out there, it spread like wildfire through our social circles. Her phone started ringing constantly. Reporters, bloggers, random internet strangers who'd somehow gotten her number. She'd made the mistake of keeping all her social media accounts public, which meant everyone could see her carefully curated life of perfect wife and mother posts going back years. The contrast between her online persona and the reality of what everyone had just witnessed was comedy gold for the internet trolls. They started posting side-by-side comparisons. Marissa's Instagram post about date night with my amazing husband next to a screenshot from the ambulance video. Her Facebook post about loyalty and trust in marriage, paired with a still frame of her being wheeled away attached to another man. Her friends started distancing themselves one by one. The book club mysteriously had scheduling conflicts every time she tried to join their meetings. The yoga studio suddenly couldn't find her membership in their system. Even the grocery store cashiers started giving her looks that could freeze hell. But the real masterpiece came when I discovered something that made Leo's affair look like amateur hour. Hidden in her tablet's browsing history, I found evidence of something that made my blood run cold and my revenge plans expand exponentially. She hadn't been lying about there being others. Lots of others. There was an entire network, a private group that operated through encrypted apps and exclusive websites, catering to married people looking for discreet encounters. It wasn't just casual cheating. This was organized, systematic adultery with membership fees, background checks, and regular events. Marissa had been a premium member for over 3 years. 3 fucking years. The evidence was all there. Hotel receipts, membership confirmations, even reviews she'd written about other members. She'd been living a completely double life, and I'd been too stupid and trusting to see it. But now I saw everything. And more importantly, I had documentation of everything. I printed out every piece of evidence, organized it into a comprehensive file, and walked straight to the police station. Not because adultery was illegal. It's not, unfortunately, but because the network itself was involved in some activities that definitely crossed legal lines. Tax evasion, for starters. The membership fees weren't being reported as income by the organizers. Then there was the prostitution angle. Some members were paying others for services, which made it a commercial operation. And the real kicker, several members were using company credit cards and expense accounts to fund their activities, which meant embezzlement and fraud. Detective Morrison listened to my story with the expression of someone who'd thought he'd seen everything, but was rapidly discovering he was wrong. When I finished laying out the evidence, he just sat there for a moment, shaking his head. "This is going to bring down a lot of people," he said finally. "Good," I replied. "It should." Within a week, the investigation had expanded to include the FBI. Apparently, the network operated across state lines, which made it federal jurisdiction. Assets were frozen, arrests were made, and suddenly Marissa wasn't just dealing with public humiliation, she was looking at potential criminal charges. The local news picked up the story, and our little suburban scandal became a cautionary tale about modern marriage and digital infidelity. Marissa's picture was on the evening news, identified as a key figure in a multi-state adultery ring. She stopped leaving the house entirely, stopped answering her phone, stopped responding to emails or texts. She'd become a prisoner in our own home, afraid to face a world that now knew exactly who she really was. And Leo? He'd disappeared entirely. Skipped town, closed his social media accounts, vanished like he'd never existed. Smart move, actually. The internet has a long memory, but it gets distracted easily if you remove yourself from the equation. But Marissa couldn't disappear. She had too many connections, too many responsibilities, too much evidence tying her to everything. She was trapped, and she knew it. Phase 4 was exceeding all expectations. 3 weeks later, Leo made the mistake of coming back. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying my morning coffee and the kind of peaceful silence that comes from having a house to yourself, when I heard the familiar sound of raised voices from the front yard. Through the window, I could see Leo standing on our porch, gesticulating wildly at Marissa, who was blocking the doorway like she was protecting Fort Knox instead of our suburban shithole. The guy looked like he'd been living rough, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, that desperate edge that comes from having your entire life implode on social media. Apparently, disappearing hadn't worked out as well as he'd hoped. The internet may have a short attention span, but debt collectors and angry gym owners have much longer memories. "You owe me 20 grand, he was shouting, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Medical bills, lost income, legal fees. This is all your fault." Marissa's voice was sharp and bitter when she replied. "My fault? You're the one who suggested using that stuff in the first place. I didn't tell you to bring goddamn superglue." There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Even better, Mrs. Patterson was already on her balcony with her phone out, probably live streaming the whole thing. Some people never learn. The argument escalated quickly from there. Leo shoved past Marissa into the house, and she followed him, their voices carrying through the thin walls as they continued their blame game inside our home. My home, technically, since the divorce papers had finally gone through. I could hear them moving around upstairs, probably in what used to be our bedroom. Leo's voice was getting louder, more aggressive, while Marissa was fighting back with the kind of vicious anger that comes from having nothing left to lose. Then I heard the slap, then the crash, then more shouting, followed by what sounded like furniture being thrown around. I waited exactly 5 minutes before calling my contact at the police department. Hey, Detective Morrison? Yeah, it's happening again. Same address. Domestic disturbance, possible assault. You might want to send a couple units. The police arrived just as Leo came stumbling out of the house, clutching his face where Marissa had apparently connected with something heavy. She followed him onto the porch, screaming obscenities that would have made a sailor blush. That's when Leo made his second mistake of the day. He shoved her. Marissa went down hard on the concrete steps, and that's when the officers decided they'd seen enough. Leo was in handcuffs before he could explain that he was just trying to collect money he was owed. Marissa was cuffed 30 seconds later when she tried to attack the officers who were arresting her meal ticket. The beautiful thing about having a criminal investigation already open is that any new charges get added to the existing case file. Leo's assault charge became part of the larger fraud investigation. Marissa's disorderly conduct and resisting arrest joined her embezzlement charges. By the time the dust settled, they were both looking at serious jail time. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but it turned out to be a formality. When one parent is in county lockup awaiting trial, and the other parent has documentation proving systematic fraud and infidelity, family court judges tend to make decisions pretty quickly. I walked out of that courthouse with full custody, the house, the cars, and a clean slate. Our son was staying with my sister during the proceedings, blissfully unaware that his mother had destroyed her own life through a combination of stupidity and greed. That night, I sat in my quiet house with a glass of 20-year-old scotch, listening to the absence of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The place actually felt like a home again instead of a crime scene. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. Case closed. Both defendants pled guilty. Marissa got 18 months, Leo got 2 years. Thought you'd want to know. I deleted the message and poured myself another drink. Sometimes justice isn't blind. Sometimes it just takes a little help seeing clearly.